The signal lights at the Canaan Ridge station were still blinking when the three technicians vanished atop the Monongahela Range in West Virginia, a sparsely populated area with just a few thousand people scattered across snow-covered valleys. The December storm dumped nearly 14 inches of snow across Randolph County, turning the road up to the station into an indistinguishable white ribbon along the edge of sheer drops. At 4:12 p.m., the supply team waved goodbye through the frosted glass as Joe Lasker hugged the thermometer flask they had just returned. Stepping across the narrow porch connecting the annex and the control room, that metal flask, with its long scratch along the body from years of use, was an item the station had kept since the early 1980s. The supply supervisor watched the three men's figures gradually dissolve into the swirling snow, their dark blue coats the last splash of color visible before full darkness fell. What happened in the hours that followed would haunt this mountain community for more than 2 decades. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. In December 1997, the Monongahela Mountains entered the harshest phase of winter, with strong winds signaling an approaching major blizzard. Isolated amid dense forests and steep slopes, the Canaan Ridge Weather Observation Station served as a critical monitoring point for the region. Staffed by 3 employees working in shifts, Ethan Merrick, in charge of overall operations, Joe Lasker, the technician responsible for data logging, and Caleb Hodge, who handled security and facility maintenance. In the extreme conditions of late December, working at an isolated station like Canaan Ridge required close coordination among the 3, especially since blizzards could cut off access roads for days. On the afternoon of December 15th, the routine supply team arrived at the station, bringing food, fuel, and some replacement equipment. They noted everything appeared normal. Systems were running stably, communications were maintained, and all 3 employees were present, busy preparing for the bad weather. There were no mentions of any conflicts or issues, and the exchange was brief since the supply team had to leave early before conditions worsened. That encounter became the last time anyone saw the 3 station employees. By evening, as the blizzard began to form, the Meteorological Center awaited the routine radio update from Canaan Ridge as usual. However, the 9 p.m. report never came in. At first, the loss of signal was attributed to weather interference, a situation that could still occur in mountainous areas. But by the next scheduled contact, and the one after that, the station remained completely silent. The prolonged interruption prompted the duty officer at the Elkins Meteorological Center to repeatedly call the station with no response. The night passed in total communication blackout. By the morning of December 16th, each employee's family tried calling to check on them after hearing about the blizzard on the radio, but all received no answer. The Meteorological Center also failed to restore any signal from the station. No radio calls, no automatic reports, no signs of activity. The duration of the communication loss exceeded normal thresholds, especially since all 3 were trained personnel following safety protocols in severe weather. By mid-morning, after exhausting all communication methods without success, the families officially reported the missing persons case to the Randolph County Sheriff's Office. The Randolph County Sheriff's Office received the missing persons report late in the morning of December 16, 1997. When all 3 victims' families confirmed they had been trying to contact the Canaan Ridge Observation Station since dawn, but received no response. Prior to that, the Elkins Meteorological Center had already sent an internal alert about the station failing to transmit scheduled weather data overnight on December 15th, which was rare since Canaan Ridge operated continuously and was equipped with backup signal systems. Sheriff Michael Donovan personally took the report and requested a compilation of all final communication data from the Meteorological Center to pinpoint the exact time of the interruption. The compilation showed the last radio signal from the station was recorded on the evening of December 15th, before the blizzard intensified over the Monongahela Range. After that point, the system received no reports or automatic signals whatsoever, not even backup data packets that were sent even without manual operation. Donovan considered the possibility of weather-related signal loss. But the extended blackout through the night and into the next morning, combined with none of the three employees answering the phone, meant it could not be dismissed as a routine glitch. He requested detailed weather reports for the past 3 days from the Meteorological Center, topographic maps of the Canaan Ridge area, trail gradients, avalanche risk points, and the duty rosters of the three employees. All initial data indicated the station was in an area extremely prone to isolation during major storms, and once trails were snow-covered, leaving the station or seeking help independently was nearly impossible. This context elevated the case to high-risk missing, meaning disappearance, under dangerous conditions with potential life-threatening environmental factors. After assessing the risk level, Sheriff Donovan held an emergency internal meeting to establish the site access mission. He assigned a team consisting of 2 experienced winter mountain deputies, a SAR search and rescue member, familiar with Monongahela terrain, a communications technician, carrying enhanced transceiver equipment, and a forestry officer knowledgeable about changes in the area around the station. The team's task was to travel up to Canaan Ridge in thick snow and high winds, safely reach the station, assess the facility's condition, and determine the presence or absence of the 3 employees. While preparing to depart, Donovan required the team to equip handheld GPS units resistant to interference, compasses, long-range flashlights, trail marking beacons, climbing ropes, remote body temperature scanners, and medical kits for hypothermia. All equipment had to be double-checked to prevent failures in extreme weather. Simultaneously, he directed the SAR team to set up a temporary relay station at the mountain base to minimize communication delays and allow the access team to maintain frequent contact while ascending. The sheriff also instructed the Meteorological Center to continue scanning radio signals across the region for any irregular signals that might reappear from the station, even weak or fragmented data packets. While the access team finalized preparations, Donovan directly contacted representatives from the 3 employees' families to verify recent behavior, schedules, and health status, ruling out voluntary departure for personal reasons. All verifications confirmed the 3 had been acting normally, with no plans to leave the station before their scheduled rotation. By early afternoon, the access team began the journey up Canaan Ridge, as the blizzard remained light but sufficient to restrict visibility and make trail travel difficult. Fresh snow covered the ground thickly, with strong gusts in many sections blurring the path, forcing the team to constantly use GPS and mark the route to stay on course. Though weather conditions were not overly dangerous, rapidly dropping temperatures and steep terrain required slow movement, with careful observation of each area to ensure no potential signs related to the missing employees were overlooked. As they neared the station area, the team slowed and conducted distant observations, focusing mainly on spots likely to show signs of human activity. Thick snow cover left no clear footprints on the ground, but they still noted snow accumulation levels to estimate how long the area had been undisturbed. The observation station appeared through the snow and fog, with no lights emitting from windows or equipment, consistent with the Meteorological Center's assessment that the station had ceased operations the previous night. At a safe distance of a few meters from the main door, the team used binoculars to scan positions around the station. The main entrance, rear exit, generator area, antenna site, and the open space in front, typically used for storing supplies during deliveries. They detected no movement, no signs of people, no engine sounds, and no smoke rising from the vent pipe, which normally appeared when the heating system was running in deep cold. After confirming no immediate risks, the team approached the station to inspect basic structures. The backup power source was checked first. The display showed the generator was off, but it could not be determined externally whether it was shut down per procedure or due to malfunction. They examined the external pressure regulator, noting no power output, and marked it for detailed internal inspection. Next, the team assessed the main door, closed but unlocked. No signs of forced entry, hinges and handle intact, snow at the base, indicating it had not been opened for at least several hours. The rear auxiliary door was in similar condition, with no recent opening signs. All windows were sealed shut, some with snow packed along the edges. They circled the station once more to check terrain against the walls and the supply storage area, but recorded no signs of impact, disturbance, or anything out of place. The surrounding area was completely silent, with only the sound of wind and falling snow. After completing the exterior survey and confirming no human movement in the area, the access team reported to the sheriff that they had reached the station safely and were preparing for the next phase, internal inspection of the facility, to determine the specific status of the Canaan Ridge operation point, based on their external observations in worsening weather. As the access team entered the Canaan Ridge station, they maintained initial observation protocols to avoid disturbing the scene. The door opened slowly, due to a thin layer of ice around the edges, and upon crossing the threshold, they confirmed no signs of movement or sound inside. The interior was completely quiet, with only wind through door gaps and snow hitting the walls. Ceiling lights were off, heating was inactive, and the temperature was significantly lower than normal for an operational facility. The team split up to observe each area in the agreed order: control room, common living area, sleeping quarters, and storage. They collected no evidence at this stage, only noting object positions, equipment status, and overall orderliness. In the control room, the main console still showed connection indicator lights, but displayed no data. The desktop computer monitor was completely off, the desk radio in standby mode, with no transmission. The workstation had documents, pens, and open log forms, but the team touched nothing. They only marked distances, object positions, and the presence of operational equipment. On the wall hung the weekly duty calendar, with the 3 employees' names corresponding to shifts. The team noted December 15th was marked, but had no additional notes beside it. Below the console was the backup equipment area, including handheld radios, positioning devices, flashlights, and emergency heaters. All remained in standard positions. They visually confirmed no signs of hasty removal or use, but touched nothing. In the common living area, the team observed the dining table, eases, water heater, and small kitchen zone. Furnishings appeared arranged as usual, with no major disturbance. The team took overview photos, but strictly avoided detailed item checks to preserve the scene for subsequent forensic examination. The small refrigerator was closed, stove off, all household appliances inactive. The station logbook sat on a shelf by the table, its cover slightly warped from humidity. Again, they noted position but did not open or flip any pages. In the sleeping quarters, the team approached each bed cautiously. 3 beds were arranged close together per isolated station standards, each with blankets, pillows, and personal items. Nothing appeared significantly disrupted. The team noted dust coverage, room coldness, and window status. 1 bedside lamp was off with its cord still plugged in. They also observed personal storage compartments, but did not open them. In the storage area, where support items and field equipment were kept, the team only opened the door and recorded visuals. Supply crates were lined up in rows, many labeled with contents. No items were on the floor or showed signs of recent movement. Rescue gear, reflective jackets, snow shovels, and emergency supplies were all unused. This was noted as a factor in the station's operational status, but the team made no evaluations since their task at this stage was solely observation, not analysis or causation assumptions. After completing the preliminary survey, the team confirmed the station was completely unoccupied with no indications anyone had left recently. All contact surfaces remained untouched, with no one moving furniture or structures. The team leader listed areas for sealing in preparation for detailed forensic examination, including the control room, common area, and rear exit. Doors were temporarily sealed to preserve the station's condition for the follow-up specialist team. They conducted one final check to ensure no one was inside, no signs of hiding or movement in concealed corners. Upon exiting, the team completed the interior status report per protocol: station unoccupied, furnishings in overall original configuration, no clear signs of conflict or accident at preliminary observation level. They then secured the station in scene preservation mode, photographed seals on doors, walls, and surroundings to ensure the environment remained unchanged before the in-depth forensic team arrived. After completing the preliminary survey inside the station and sealing the area, the approach team reported back to Sheriff Donovan to proceed with the next step. Interviewing the supply team, the last people to see the 3 Canaan Ridge station employees on the afternoon of December 15. The supply team members were summoned to the sheriff's office, and Donovan conducted the sessions in small groups to prevent any cross-influence on their statements. Each person was asked to recount in detail the time they arrived at the station, the duration of their stay, the work status of the 3 employees, and any other events that could help reconstruct the timeline before contact was lost. According to the supply team leader's statement, they arrived at the station around 1540 after navigating a trail with light snow cover but still safe enough for off-road vehicles. Upon arrival, they saw Ethan checking the wind speed recording equipment in the control room, Joe entering data into forms at his desk, and Caleb in the hallway checking the side door lock. All 3 employees appeared normal, with no signs of stress or instability. The supply team stated that the handover of supplies was quick and efficient, lasting only about 15 minutes. They moved fuel, food, and basic repair tools into the adjacent storage area with assistance from Caleb. There were no conversations beyond routine work-related topics. When asked about the attitude or mental state of each individual, all 3 supply team members said that Ethan seemed focused on monitoring the forecasted storm developments. Joe maintained his usual demeanor, quiet but steadily working, and Caleb appeared somewhat hurried in his actions, but showed no obvious signs of tension. Sheriff Donovan noted that all 3 employees exhibited no notably unusual behavior during the short time the supply team was present at the station. When pressed further about the departure time, the supply team confirmed that between 16 o'clock and 16:10 was when they left. While closing the vehicle doors and preparing to head down the mountain, one of them heard a metallic sound coming from the west side of the station, not loud, but noticeable enough to catch attention. According to the description, the sound was like metal lightly striking a hard surface, possibly caused by wind shifting some equipment, but since it was getting dark quickly and the wind was picking up, no one went back to check. The other 2 did not hear this sound, but they confirmed that the weather conditions at the time could have muffled sounds or caused uneven transmission depending on wind direction. The sheriff noted this as the only unusual detail in the entire testimony, though its relevance could not yet be determined. Based on the sequence of information gathered, Donovan requested the supply team to precisely describe the sequence of movements and interactions from the moment they approached the station until they left. The consolidated testimony showed 1540. The supply team arrived at the station gate, and Caleb let them in. 1542. They transferred supplies into the storage area. 1545. Ethan signed to confirm receipt of all supplies. 1546. Joe double-checked the data logs to ensure no interruption during the handover. 1550. The supply team finished organizing and exited the main door. 1550. They boarded the vehicle. 16 o'clock. The vehicle began leaving the station. Around 1603, the person who heard the metallic sound confirmed it occurred right after the vehicle turned downhill. Donovan requested additional recording of environmental factors at that time: wind picking up, temperature dropping rapidly, thicker fog reducing visibility. No one on the supply team saw any unusual movement in the surrounding area. No signs of a 4th person appearing, and no indications that the 3 employees intended to leave the station with them or go anywhere else immediately after the supply handover. To complete the timeline for December 15th, Donovan combined the supply team's testimony with data received from the Meteorological Center. The last radio report on the night of December 15th was sent several hours after the supply team left, indicating the 3 employees were still maintaining normal operations after receiving supplies. From this, the sheriff identified the critical time window to focus on from 1610 until the periodic radio signals stopped being sent, a period long enough for any incident to occur without direct witnesses. The supply team was asked to provide their full travel log for the day, maps of the routes taken, and information on weather conditions observed on the way down the mountain to support cross-verification. All this data was entered into the case file, forming a final timeline for December 15th, based on all verified records, the supply team's arrival time, departure time, the employee's status, and the only anomalous detail being the metallic sound from the west side of the station, just before they left the area. With this timeline, Sheriff Donovan completed the establishment of the baseline events for the last day the three employees were seen, providing a foundation for scene evaluation and identifying unwitnessed periods in the afternoon and night of December 15th. Periods likely containing events leading to the prolonged loss of contact that no one could immediately explain. After finalizing the timeline for the end of December 15th, based on the supply team's testimony, Sheriff Donovan moved on to planning the field search by analyzing in detail the topographic maps of the area around Canaan Ridge Station. The Elkins Meteorological Center provided large-scale topographic maps, trail maps, slope models, and weather data for the 3 days prior to the loss of contact. The most prominent feature of the area is the terrain sloping down in 3 main directions, creating 3 feasible routes that anyone leaving the station, voluntarily or due to external forces, could follow or be carried along. Donovan and the SAR team focused on dividing the search area based on the natural structure of the terrain and factors that could influence movement during blizzard conditions. They identified the first route as westward along the West Ridge slope. This area has steep gradients, strong winds, and is often affected by swirling air currents during storms. Based on the elevation maps, West Ridge has numerous small landslide sections over the years, making it a likely location for accidents if one or more employees left the station in poor visibility. This direction also aligns with the area where a supply team member heard the metallic sound upon leaving, so Donovan marked West Ridge as the priority search route. However, investigating this area requires experienced mountaineering teams due to high slipperiness, dense vegetation, and risk of small avalanches. The second direction is north, leading down to the northern ravine Rocky Gorge. According to the topographic maps, this is a natural route prone to accumulating water and snow, forming deep gullies between large rock formations. If someone left the station in this direction, whether accidentally or for a task, the risk of slipping or getting trapped is very high. The SAR team noted that northwest winds on December 15th could carry light objects or sounds toward the ravine, so searches here need to be conducted in parallel, but with caution to avoid collapsing the snow surface. The third direction is southeast, along the lower stream trail leading to a small creek and then connecting to a forestry road. Although this is the easiest and least dangerous route, it lies outside the strong wind zone, so it is less likely for a weather-related sudden event to pull someone in this direction. However, rescue teams still had to thoroughly check it to rule out the possibility that one of the 3 employees left the station intentionally, such as to inspect equipment or move to a better signal location. All 3 directions were marked on a composite map with overlapping search circles at a 1-mile radius from the station. The SR team used grid techniques, dividing the area into search cells based on coordinates to ensure no location was missed. Contour lines on the maps were carefully analyzed to determine the danger level of each segment, thereby adjusting search speed and personnel allocation accordingly. Donovan also requested simulations of wind directions and snowfall amounts in the 12 hours before and after the radio signal loss to assess the likelihood of snow covering tracks or causing minor terrain changes. From the weather data, they knew that the heaviest snowfall occurred between 20 o'clock and 2 o'clock, making the search more difficult as any footprints or slide marks could have been completely covered. After compiling the data, Donovan approved the official search map, a 1-mile radius around the station divided into 3 sectors corresponding to the 3 terrain directions. Each sector further subdivided into smaller segments with a list of key locations to check, such as slope edges, rock gullies, stream intersections, clearings between tree clusters, and slippery trail sections. This map was printed in multiple copies for the search teams to ensure every member understood the scope and movement plan. All members were reminded to preserve the scene if any human signs were discovered, even the smallest, to ensure accurate documentation and avoid disrupting potential traces under the snow. The initial search phase plan was completed when the SAR team agreed on the procedure: conduct simultaneous searches in all three directions, prioritizing West Ridge due to the anomalous sound in the testimony while ensuring full coverage of the entire 1-mile radius circle. With detailed topographic maps, reasonable area division, and clear search grids, Donovan believed this was the optimal search structure to begin the process of finding the first signs related to the disappearance of the 3 Canaan Ridge Station employees. Immediately after the 1-mile radius search map was approved, the SR team deployed the first search phase with assistance from K-9 units specialized in locating missing persons in mountainous forest conditions. Since the Canaan Ridge station had been sealed, the team only brought the search dogs into the sleeping area to obtain scent samples from each employee without touching objects, ensuring all traces remained intact. All 3 K-9s responded steadily to the samples, confirming high accuracy and identification. After collecting the samples, the team took the K-9s to the area in front of the station to begin scanning the outer perimeter. The initial reaction from 2 of the 3 dogs was toward the northwest near the West Ridge area, where the terrain is steeply sloping and winds are typically stronger than in other directions. The SR team noted that this aligned with the search grid data and the testimony about the metallic sound heard from that direction. The K-9 serfs were given long leashes to track movement directions, but only a few dozen meters in, the scent trail weakened and was dispersed by the wind, causing the dogs to lose precise tracking ability. This was consistent with the assessment that heavy snowfall on the night of December 15th had completely covered any human movement signs, rapidly scattering scents. After marking the initial scent loss area, the SR team continued expanding the search along the trail leading to West Ridge. This trail is commonly used by station employees when checking equipment in the western area, but in thick snow conditions, the surface becomes slippery and dangerous. The SAR team moved in a spaced formation, with members about 5 meters apart to ensure full observation of the trail width. They used probing poles to check snow hardness and avoid hollow snow areas that could cause falls into small crevices below. At 2 steep sections, the SR team paused to observe signs such as compacted snow, slide marks, or vegetation disturbance, but found no clear indications that 1 or more people had passed through after the blizzard began. The K-9s were brought back to this area twice, but still could not find a continuous scent trail. As they approached the first cliff edge of West Ridge, the SR team scanned the area with binoculars and determined that strong winds blowing from the southwest across the slope had deformed the snow layer in multiple directions, complicating trace identification. The team checked large boulders and fan-shaped tree clusters where snow might accumulate unusually if an object fell, but saw no signs of disturbance. This area also showed no signs of large animals like bears or deer, which could interfere with K-9 size or affect scents. To ensure nothing was missed, the SR team marked the entire check trail section and continued to lower areas where the terrain widens. However, when moving to flatter sections, the K-9 size completely lost the scent, forcing the team to return to the West Ridge perimeter and expand the search to mid-slope sections. They moved in parallel across 3 search strips about 10 meters apart, using fixed ropes for safety. Thick snow cover made ground contouring difficult, but the team maintained a steady pace to cover the entire boundary of the first route. Beyond the trail, the SR team also checked multiple transition points between vegetation layers, areas that often retain traces like broken branches or displaced snow, but still found no signs related to the 3 employees. Strong winds caused the K-9 size to lose focus multiple times, requiring handlers to give them breaks before resuming tracking. After completing the designated area in West Ridge within the 1-mile radius, the SR team shifted to checking the western cliff edges, where the terrain changes abruptly from sloping to vertical. This is the most dangerous part of the first route, and the team used anchored ropes for safe access. They carefully inspected the cliff edges, rock crevices, and areas of compacted snow, but detected no clear traces such as clothing, items, or deep slide marks. Weather conditions made analysis difficult. Thick snow could have covered any signs within hours. By the end of the first full check, the SR team compiled all observations. K9s only picked up initial scents very close to the station, losing them completely upon entering West Ridge. The trail showed no new movement signs. Cliff edges had no foreign objects, and the entire Phase 1 search area yielded no bodies or human traces. This led the SR team to note that the first route is the area with the most wind and snow variability, as well as where scents disperse strongly, preventing K9 size from effectively leading beyond a short distance. Upon completing the day's tasks, the team marked all scanned areas, recorded snow coverage levels, wind directions, and checked points, preparing to report back to Sheriff Donovan for adjusting the next search plan based on data collected from Phase 1. After the SR team completed the initial search phase outside and reported back that no clear traces were detected, Sheriff Donovan directed the crime scene investigation team to return to Canaan Ridge Station to conduct a detailed interior examination, the next step, following the preliminary survey in the previous section. At this point, all areas inside the station had been fully sealed, ensuring no interference since the access team departed. The investigation team removed the seal on the main door, set up the recording cameras again, and assigned tasks to each member according to specific areas to ensure the evidence documentation process was systematic and no details were overlooked. The detailed examination first focused on the common living area, where they discovered the dining table with several significant signs. On the table surface, 3 sets of eating utensils had been laid out, but the meal had not begun. Empty plates, knives and forks placed neatly, and 2 of the 3 chairs still in their proper positions, with only 1 chair tipped over to the side, as if someone had stood up too hastily or bumped into it while leaving their seat. The presence of the tipped chair was noted as the first indication that this space had been unusually interrupted, contrasting with the typical orderliness of a shift following procedures. Next to the table, the coffee pot still contained nearly half its volume, but the coffee inside had completely cooled, indicating it had been brewed several hours earlier. The investigation team measured the temperature of the remaining liquid to determine the relative time of last use, then sealed the coffee pot and the drinking cups on the table as evidence. Additionally, they checked the kitchen and water heating area, confirming no signs of incomplete burning or technical malfunctions that could relate to the meal interruption. All these observations indicated that the daily activities of the 3 personnel had been abruptly halted before they could eat. But the investigation team did not draw conclusions on site and focused solely on objectively describing all details. Leaving the common living area, the group moved to the bedroom, where the 3 personnel beds were located. This area was considered one of the clearest indicators of each individual's preparation state before leaving the station. Each bed had its blankets neatly folded, showing that all 3 were not in a resting state when they left the facility. However, the most significant anomaly was in the coat hanging compartment. Only 1 coat was hanging in place, while the remaining 2 coats corresponding to each personnel were missing from the closet. The investigation team noted this because, according to shift procedures in blizzard conditions, all personnel must wear specialized coats when going outside the station. The disappearance of 2 coats meant that at least 2 individuals had left the station fully equipped with protective gear, but the absence of the 3rd coat led the team to note that not all 3 left the station simultaneously under the same preparation conditions. This was recorded in the evidence report as a significant anomaly. During the bedroom inspection, the investigation team also noted the positions of personal items such as shoes, belts, and protective gear, but did not move any items. Each item was tagged for future cross-referencing. At the table next to the bedroom window, they found a small wall clock that had fallen onto the table's surface. Notably, the clock hands had completely stopped at 9:17 p.m. The investigation team checked the remaining battery in the clock, determining it was not depleted but had stopped abruptly, making the 9:17 p.m. mark a particularly important timestamp in establishing the sequence of events. The clock was sealed as evidence, and its fall position was photographed from multiple angles to assess possible environmental impact or vibration. They then completed a full documentation form: clock type, original position according to station interior standards, actual position when found, and classification of the stop time. Next, the investigation team returned to the control area where the main operational equipment was located to document the machinery status. The central control panel was fully recorded with current readings. The system showed no new data, screens off, radio equipment in standby mode. They did not power on the devices as this could alter stored information, but noted that all buttons and switches were in normal operating positions, showing no signs of hasty adjustment or sudden shutdown. A data entry form stack remained open on Joe's desk, recorded in its exact position. The team viewed this as an indication that he was working when the process inside the station was interrupted. Additionally, the team noted the positions of personal devices such as pencil cases, measuring rulers, and small notepads, but did not move any items. These evidence items were marked for future scene reconstruction. In the rear exit area, the secondary door leading to the dense forest, the investigation team checked the doorframe, hinges, and latch condition. The door was securely closed with no signs of forced entry, and the door edges had even snow accumulation, indicating it had not been opened for a considerable time before the access team arrived. This reinforced the canine findings that the strongest scent trails were inside the bedroom and front door area, not the rear door. The investigation team photographed the snow layer on the door edges and collected snow samples for relative temperature testing, but only documented without analysis. In the supply storage area, they noted all containers were in their proper positions as in the preliminary survey. No signs of shifting large containers, securing straps intact, and tool compartments all closed. This arrangement reinforced the assessment that none of the 3 personnel had performed equipment repairs immediately before the station lost contact. All observations were listed in the internal evidence log with unique identifiers for each area. Summarizing the detailed interior examination phase, the specialized team agreed on the initial official evidence items in the disappearance case: the dining table and unfinished meal, the chair tipped out of position, the cooled coffee pot, the 2 missing coats, the clock stopped at 9:17 p.m., and the control equipment status indicating sudden activity interruption. All these evidence items were sealed, photographed according to forensic standards, and entered into the scene file for subsequent evaluation steps. After completing the detailed interior examination and collecting the initial evidence items, the specialized team proceeded to examine the logbook, the daily operational record book of Canaan Ridge Station. One of the most important information sources for determining the operational status and behavior of the 3 personnel in the days leading up to the loss of contact. The logbook was found on the control desk, placed right next to Joe's data entry pad, indicating it was in frequent use during the shift. The investigation team did not open the logbook at the scene, but sealed it and took it outside to read on a clean table to avoid cross-contamination with fibers, dust, or tearing the pages, which were already damp and slightly warped due to prolonged low temperatures. When the logbook was opened, the team began reviewing from December 12th, 3 days before the station lost contact, as this was a recent enough period to reflect continuous station activity. The December 12th entries showed concise, standard technical notes, average wind speed, snow accumulation levels, pressure readings, and equipment status notes. All entries were written by Ethan, with consistent handwriting and no unusual symbols. The team read each line carefully, but found no content differing from normal operating procedures. Moving to December 13th, the logbook was still primarily recorded by Ethan, but at the end of the day appeared an unmarked note: unusually strong winds, direction changing faster than expected. This was a rare note, because hourly changes are typically shown in data tables, not free-form phrases. The team noted this as the first anomaly, though the content was not directly alarming but indicated meteorological conditions were not entirely stable. A difference appeared at the page bottom with a shorter, more hurried line, not in Ethan's handwriting. Caleb seemed tense this afternoon. This line appeared to be written by Joe, with smaller and sharper script. The content provided no further explanation, but the investigation team marked it as the second anomaly, the first time the logbook recorded the psychological state of one of the three personnel. There was no mention of conflict, disagreement, or equipment issues related to Caleb, so the team only noted it for future cross-referencing. On December 14th, the logbook had more entries than usual. Ethan continued recording hourly wind speeds, snowfall amounts, and pressure fluctuations. However, the evening notes were markedly different. Strong whistling winds around West Ridge, strange noise when checking rear door. This was a fuller sentence than typical technical notes, showing unusual attention to sounds from outside the station. The investigation team compared ink spread, determining the line was written in the evening due to slight bleeding, consistent with increased humidity when the station was affected by strong winds. Immediately below this line, there was an additional note in smaller handwriting, likely Joe's. Caleb went to check the antenna again, seemed unfocused. This was the second mention of Caleb in the logbook related to his mental state. This was insufficient to draw any conclusions, but the team noted it as behavioral data potentially related to later developments. The rest of the page recorded some strong wind fluctuations at levels not exceeding safety thresholds, but with unusual direction trends. No notes indicated equipment failure or issues requiring the three personnel to leave the station. Moving to the December 15th page, the last day the supply team saw all three personnel, the investigation team discovered a third change in recording style. The morning of December 15th was recorded normally: temperature, wind speed, snow levels, supply team arrival and departure times. But midway down the page, there was a lightly crossed out but still readable line. Metallic sound from the west, source unclear. This was the second logbook record of an unusual sound, matching the supply team members' statement of hearing a metallic noise as they left the station. This note indicated the sound event occurred not only when the supply team departed, but was heard by the station personnel earlier. The investigation team marked this as a timestamp directly related to the period just before loss of contact. The final section of the December 15th page contained the most significant anomaly. A short entry of only 3 lines, but the paper where this section was located had a slight tear at the bottom edge, as if someone had torn off the end. The handwriting in the remaining 3 lines differed from the other 2, most likely Caleb's. The content read, "Wind shifted direction suddenly, door rattling strongly. Checking outside one more time." Immediately below, the rest of the page was torn off about 4-5 centimeters vertically, revealing uneven pulled paper edges, not a clean cut. The investigation team determined this was not age-related tearing, but due to force, pulled from inside out, likely while the logbook was open. This left the final December 15th entry incomplete, and the team could not determine the torn content. The page tearing was recorded as important scene evidence, because the logbook is a document required to be carefully preserved in the station. Additionally, the fresh tear, without dust or discoloration, indicated it occurred shortly before the station was abandoned. The investigation team photographed every detail of the page, including the torn edge, curvature, tear angle, and possible fingerprint positions. All these indicators were entered into the evidence log. Summarizing the 3 days of entries, the team determined the logbook showed 3 types of anomalies: records of stronger than expected winds, 2 notes related to Caleb's state, and a page with missing final content torn off, occurring on the day of loss of contact. This was the first direct evidence that events inside the station had not proceeded normally in the period before all 3 personnel disappeared, and the logbook became the most important internal evidence collected to date. After completing the logbook analysis and noting anomalies in entries from December 12 to 15, the technical team proceeded to examine the Canaan Ridge station radio system to clarify the timeline of the three personnel's final communications before the station went completely silent. The radio was the station's most critical communication device, operating on a fixed cycle with automatic timestamps sent to the Elkins Meteorological Center. Any changes, interruptions, or unusual signals were fully logged by the Elkins system in technical journal format. First, the technical team copied the entire radio data log from the Elkins station, including timestamps of signal packets received on December 15th and early morning December 16th. They created a comparison table with a default transmission cycle of Canaan Ridge Station, set to send automatic reports every 30 minutes, interspersed with manual updates sent by the on-duty personnel. When comparing both sides, the team found that December 15th maintained normal communication status until late afternoon, matching the supply team's statements. The automatic report at 18 o'clock was sent on time with full data volume. The manual report at 19 o'clock, sent by Joe, was also recorded normally, with no signal interference. However, checking the next expected timestamp at 19:30, the Elkins Meteorological Center received no data packets. This was the first interruption of the day. The system noted no data received with error code 204, indicating the transmitting radio equipment did not send data, not an issue at the receiving station. The signal gap began here, and the technical team marked 19:30 as the first radio-related anomaly timestamp. Continuing to the next mark, the 20 o'clock timestamp also had no signal. However, when the team reviewed the raw system log at Elkins, they discovered an important detail. At 20:14, 14 minutes after the 20 o'clock mark, the system recorded a partial ping, a fragmented, incomplete signal. This signal contained no meteorological data, only the Canaan Ridge station identification code, but the data packet was cut off midway. The technical team determined that the equipment at Canaan Ridge had initiated transmission but failed to complete it, resulting in Elkins receiving only a truncated signal sequence. This 14-minute gap could not be explained by simple technical failure, because if the equipment was completely malfunctioning, no signal would appear at all. The 2014 signal showed the device was active but interrupted before completion. When cross-referencing with the logbook, which noted strong winds and station structure shaking, the technical team marked the time coincidence between internal station disturbances and equipment interruption. After 2014, the system received no further signals until the 21 o'clock mark. The 21 o'clock mark, which was the manual report the shift was responsible for sending, was completely absent. The technical team noted that the absence of the manual report at this time was particularly significant because it reflected human non-operation, not merely equipment malfunction. Checking the 21:30 timestamp, an automatic report was initiated from Canaan Ridge Station but cut off completely after less than one-third of the transmission duration. This was the final signal recorded by the Elkins Center from Canaan Ridge. The signal consisted of 7 fragmented data packets, with the first 5 containing station identification and the last 2 cut off midway. No meteorological data such as wind speed, temperature, or pressure readings was transmitted. This made 21:30 the most important mark in the entire radio analysis. The radio system was attempting to transmit, but was abruptly cut off, not due to delay, not complete weather interference, but a situation where the device operated midway then stopped immediately. Analyzing the signal waveform, the technical team determined the interruption was not due to typical atmospheric interference in blizzards. The waveform did not degrade gradually, but stopped suddenly, similar to the transmitter being powered off or impacted at the exact moment it was sending data. To ensure accurate analysis, the team compared this waveform with previous blizzard-related cases. Results showed that blizzard interference typically causes complete signal loss or distorted packets, never a mid-transmission cut with intact amplitude, as in Canaan Ridge. This forced the team to record the 21:30 signal as a notable anomaly. Additionally, Elkins' record showed no further transmission attempts after 21:30, despite the automatic cycle requiring attempts at 22 o'clock and 22:30. The complete silence after 21:30 reinforced the assumption that the equipment ceased operation immediately, not in partial interruptions. Another factor included in the analysis was the correlation between the logbook and radio. The logbook stopped at the 9:17 p.m. mark with the bedroom clock failure, while the final radio timestamp recorded a cut signal around 21:30. The 13-minute difference between these timestamps did not allow determination of direct relation between the two events, but the technical team had to record both data points in the report as the last timestamps showing signs of human and equipment activity. At the conclusion of the session, the technical team entered three main conclusions into the record. First, the station radio system operated normally until late evening December 15th. Second, there was a 14-minute signal gap between 20 o'clock and 2014, with only an unexplained partial ping. And third, the final signal at 21:30 was abruptly cut while the device was transmitting, not due to weather error or natural interruption. This was the complete content recorded in the radio analysis phase, a critical step in determining the final timeline related to the disappearance of the three Canaan Ridge station personnel. After the technical team completed the analysis of the radio system and identified the timestamps of the final communications, Sheriff Donovan immediately initiated the second phase of the search, deploying helicopters equipped with thermal cameras to expand the observation range across the entire forest surrounding Canaan Ridge. The primary objective of this phase was to determine whether there were any heat signatures from surviving individuals within a larger radius beyond the ground search area, which had been limited by terrain and weather conditions. Although the snowstorm had decreased in intensity, it still posed challenges, so deploying the helicopters had to wait until the wind subsided enough to ensure flight safety. Early the next morning, the helicopter crew from the West Virginia State Rescue Force was deployed from the small airport in Elkins, carrying long-range thermal imaging equipment capable of scanning multi-layered terrain in foggy conditions and light snow cover. As the aircraft approached the station area, the flight crew maintained a moderate altitude sufficient for the camera to clearly scan the forest surface without being affected by turbulent airflow sweeping through the mountain range. The ground SR team coordinated by providing detailed coordinates for each sector in the 1-mile radius search grid, extending to 1.5 miles to cover the entire area around West Ridge, Northern Ravine, and the Lower Stream Trail. The thermal camera began scanning from the West Ridge area, where the K9 unit had lost the scent during the previous search phase, and where numerous steep cliffs could conceal anyone who had fallen from ground visibility. The equipment detected large heat patches from wildlife such as deer and wolves, but recorded no heat sources resembling human forms. The color bands representing rock surfaces and frozen soil layers showed no unusual hot spots, indicating no signs of living people sheltering or moving in the area. The flight crew scanned the area at varying altitudes from 300 to 900 feet, but the results remained unchanged, no human-like thermal signals. After West Ridge, the helicopter shifted to scanning Northern Ravine, the most dangerous rocky gorge area if any of the three station personnel had left the facility during the storm night. Here, the uneven terrain required the thermal camera to perform multiple passes at different angles to peer deep into the ravine. The scans revealed a uniformly low background heat, with no warm spots indicating anyone sheltering under tree canopy or in rock crevices. Several small bright spots were identified as small animals, exhibiting none of the thermal characteristics of humans. The helicopter crew noted that the area was covered in thick snow, especially in wind-swept pockets, meaning that if someone had fallen there, their heat signature would diminish rapidly and become difficult to detect after many hours. Nevertheless, there were no thermal patterns showing ongoing activity. They continued scanning an additional 200 meters beyond the initial search grid boundary to rule out the possibility of victims moving farther than expected, but still yielded no results. As the helicopter moved to the southeast area, the Lower Stream Trail, they focused on scanning along the small creek running close to the mountain base. If someone had left the station in a hypothermic state and attempted to find water, the thermal camera would easily detect a lower but distinct heat signature from the surrounding environment. However, the recorded data showed absolutely no signs resembling a human body, Bright spots along the creek were quickly identified as wildlife or rocks retaining residual solar heat. The flight crew lowered altitude twice more to rescan the areas around the creek banks, a location that could retain heat traces longer than steep slopes, but all signals returned negative. Throughout this process, the ground SR team maintained radio contact with the helicopter to update coordinates and request rescans of suspicious areas. In particular, the western area where metallic sounds had previously been heard was rescanned twice by the helicopter, one at a lower altitude to ensure no signs were missed. Results from both checks showed no heat sources indicating human activity across the entire area. To increase accuracy, the flight crew used differential temperature scanning mode to detect any warm spots differing by just a few degrees from the environment, common if a person had left a heat trace shortly before. However, the entire area exhibited uniform background heat, varying only slightly with natural terrain, indicating no human presence. Upon completing the 1.5-mile radius scan, the helicopter performed a broader 2-mile sweep to assess additional areas that the ground SR team could not quickly access due to heavy snow cover. Yet the results remained the same: no human-like heat signatures. The flight crew concluded that if any living person had been in the area at the time of the scan, the thermal camera would certainly have detected them unless they were inside an enclosed structure. But the area around the station had no other buildings besides forest and rock. All scanned data was stored as continuous thermal frames for later analysis. As the helicopter returned to Elkins, Sheriff Donovan compiled reports from the flight crew and SR team, all pointed to the same conclusion: no signs of human activity within the entire thermal camera scan range. This marked the end of the second search phase, confirming that if the 3 station personnel had left the facility on the night of the storm, they left no remaining heat signatures detectable during the aerial search. Immediately after concluding the helicopter and thermal camera search phase with no detection of living human signs within the scanned range, Sheriff Donovan directed the SR team and crime scene investigators to return to the West Ridge area, where the K-9 had previously lost the scent, and the only location with an unusual detail from the supply team's testimony regarding metallic sounds heard on the afternoon of December 15th. This was considered the area most likely to contain information compared to any other search direction, as the steep terrain, strong winds, and deep rock crevices could preserve physical traces that aircraft or thermal cameras could not detect. The investigation team approached West Ridge from the northeast along the marked trail from the first search phase. Upon nearing the junction between the trail and the westward downhill slope, they began examining each area in a predefined grid, using probes, cameras, and area markers to ensure no details were missed. The team's initial findings emerged near an old metal handrail installed years earlier to assist station personnel moving along the steep slope in winter. The rail was made of steel, fixed into 2 large concrete posts. Upon approach, the team noticed the rail was bent downward at an unusual angle, with the bend directed outward toward the deep drop. This was a clear discrepancy from maintenance records, which showed the rail as stable during the most recent check in November. The investigators determined the bend was not due to metal fatigue, as the steel remained intact with no rust sufficient to weaken the structure. The bend appeared as the result of strong force applied from the inside of the trail, pushing the rail outward, most likely from a large and sudden physical impact. The team photographed the bent sections in detail, measured the deviation, and collected metal samples at the deformation points to check for any adhering fibers, skin, or materials. Although no clear biological traces were found, the unusual bend in the rail was recorded as the first peripheral physical evidence suggesting a strong interaction may have occurred there. From the rail, the team proceeded about 12 meters southwest along a natural downhill slope. As they neared a large rock cluster, one SR member spotted a metal object partially buried in thin snow beside a small bush. After clearing the snow above it, they identified it as a metal toolbox. the standard type used at Canaan Ridge Station to store outdoor repair tools such as pliers, hammers, and spare bolts. The toolbox was partially damaged, with the lid shifted to one side, hinges broken, and a large dent on the left corner. The investigators noted the damage pattern indicated the box had sustained a strong impact, likely from falling from a height or being thrown. There were no long skid marks on the exterior, meaning it had not rolled down from above but fallen near the discovery spot. Upon opening the box, no tools remained inside, only 2 loose bolts at the edge. The team photographed the box from multiple angles, collected samples from the dented metal, and sealed the box as evidence. The presence of the toolbox on the western slope, rather than in storage, as during the initial station approach, was a major anomaly, as no logbook entries indicated tools being taken outside on December 15th. From the toolbox discovery point, the SAR team expanded a small circular search radius to check for additional related evidence. Moving downhill another about 5 meters, a member spotted a skid mark approximately 2.3 meters long in the snow, extending from the ground near the rock cluster down into a crevice between 2 large rock slabs. The skid mark was distinct, with snow compressed into a slightly curved groove about 40–45 centimeters wide, corresponding to the width of a human body or similar elongated object. The team noted the mark was not from an animal, as there were no claw prints or fur drag marks. The skid directed straight down into the crevice over 4 meters deep, where snow had accumulated thicker due to wind push. For closer inspection, the team lowered a handheld LD camera into the crevice. However, thick snow below and obscured angles limited visibility to a few meters. Still, the trace clearly indicated a heavy object had slid down recently, likely before snow could fully cover it. Around the skid area, the team also found minor signs, such as compressed vegetation, displaced small rocks, and a very small dark fabric fragment near the groove edge. The fabric piece was immediately collected and sealed, but its tiny size prevented on-site identification of clothing or tool origin. The entire area was marked as a priority zone, as it was the first clear skid mark leading into a crevice, something not seen in prior search phases. After fully documenting the skid mark, the team surveyed adjacent areas about 20 meters in both east and west directions to check for additional skids or evidence from fall momentum. However, thick snow in remaining sections completely obscured any tracing. The team only noted a few lightly compressed snow spots, but not clear enough to confirm relation. When compiling the new evidence at West Ridge, the team recorded 3 key points: the bent handrail, the damaged metal toolbox, and the skid mark leading into the crevice. All 3 were in close proximity and aligned with the direction of the metallic sounds heard by the supply team. These were regarded as the first physical signs indicating an unusual event had occurred in this area, around the time of Canaan Ridge Station's loss of contact. After obtaining significant evidence at West Ridge, including the bent handrail, damaged metal toolbox, and skid mark leading into the crevice, Sheriff Donovan expanded information gathering by interviewing all individuals present around the Monongahela area during the worsening weather days, particularly the night of December 15th, the time frame confirmed to coincide with Canaan Ridge Station's loss of contact. Potential witnesses included rangers responsible for the area, several licensed hunters operating in the national forest, and a few campers at lower mountain slopes before the snowstorm forced their departure. The goal was to collect any observations of sounds, lights, movements, or unusual weather events that night, for cross-referencing with logbook timestamps and radio system data. The first witness interviewed was the ranger responsible for trails near West Ridge. He stated he left the ranger station around 1830 to head to lower areas due to the forecasted heavy storm. En route down, he did not pass near Canaan Ridge Station, but from a distant pass where the mountain range with the station was visible, he heard a very faint echoing sound like metal clashing. However, he could not pinpoint the location or cause due to strong howling winds carrying leaf rustles and small rocks rolling down slopes. He confirmed it was not a hunting rifle sound, something he could immediately recognize in the forest, but more like an object falling onto a hard surface. Due to intense winds, the sound lasted less than 2 seconds and vanished. This account matched the supply team member's description of metallic sounds on the afternoon of December 15th, making it the first overlapping point from a local witness. The investigation team continued interviewing 2 hunters recorded as present in the forest on December 15th before the storm forced them out. The first hunter said he left the hunting area around 1645 as the storm became evident. While following the northern trail, he saw no unusual lights or movement from Canaan Ridge Station, but heard a strange sequence of sounds around 19 o'clock when stopping to retie his shoelaces. The sounds were not animal, but like wind abruptly cut off, as if a large object briefly blocked the wind flow, then disappeared. He could not determine direction due to constant swirling winds. Though the source could not be precisely identified, the team noted it because it occurred near the time frame when radio signals began showing interruptions, the first time stamp loss at 1930. The second hunter left the forest later, around 1730, and recounted hearing an echoing sound like rock or metal falling onto a hard surface while reaching lower forest toward the southeast trail. He assumed it might be heavy snow, causing small rocks to fall from cliffs. However, due to bad weather and fading light, he did not investigate further. Notably, the timing of this sound coincided with the supply team's departure from the station, forming a chain of 3 witnesses at different positions, all hearing sporadic metallic sounds, though none reported seeing specific movement. The investigation team proceeded with 2 campers who had set up at the eastern lower slope on December 14th and left on the afternoon of December 15th as the storm approached. One recounted hearing a prolonged whooshing sound on the night of December 14th, one day before Canaan Ridge lost contact, like wind being compressed then released. However, due to rapidly changing forest weather, he thought it normal. The other said he heard no strange sounds that night, but noted unusual frequent wind direction changes throughout the morning of December 15th, uncommon for the area. When cross-referencing this with the logbook, the team found it matched notes about unusual wind direction changes recorded by Ethan and Joe on December 14th and 15th. This was the first direct match between logbook entries and local witness statements, indicating the meteorological changes observed by station personnel affected not just the immediate station area but the wider surrounding forest. The final witness in the group was a ranger responsible for the southern edge of Monongahela. Though not near the station on December 15th, around 20 o'clock, during the 14-minute radio signal gap, he was ending his patrol and noted unusually howling winds accompanied by a strong sound lasting 1 to 2 seconds. He described it as a heavy impact, but not a tree falling. Due to his distance over a mile from the station, he could not confirm relation. However, this timestamp coincided with Elkin's recording a partial ping at 2014, one of the most critical clues regarding radio system disruption. When compiling all testimonies from rangers, hunters, and campers, the investigation team noted 3 witness data groups. First, multiple witnesses heard metallic or impact sounds in the afternoon and evening of December 15th. Second, at least 2 noted wind direction changes or unusual wind sounds in the 2 days near the loss of contact. And third, 1 heard a strong impact, matching the radio partial ping at 2014. Though no witness saw people or direct movement from the station area, these sporadic sound reports formed the first chain of indirect information from individuals in the surrounding forest during the storm night. All testimonies were fully recorded and added to the case file, supporting determination of the acoustic context and environmental conditions around Canaan Ridge Station at the time the 3 personnel disappeared. After completing the interviews with local witnesses and noting the sequence of unusual sounds that coincided with the timestamps in the logbook and radio system, Sheriff Donovan and the investigation team returned to conduct a comprehensive analysis of all collected data to evaluate the three main hypotheses proposed in early 1997: an accident due to a landslide, the three staff members leaving the station to repair outdoor equipment, and the possibility of external human intervention on the night of the storm. The objective was not to reach a conclusion, but to determine the degree of compatibility of each hypothesis with the physical evidence and witness statements available. The first hypothesis, an accident due to a landslide, was based on the terrain characteristics of the Monongahela area: steep slopes, unstable soil and rock, and the potential for localized landslides when heavy snowfall combined with strong winds. The investigation team compared this hypothesis with the physical evidence at West Ridge, where the slide mark leading down to the rock crevice was discovered. The slide mark was long and clear, consistent with a heavy object sliding down the slope, but the thick snow layer beneath showed no signs of a major landslide around that time. The bent railing indicated a strong impact force, but the direction of the bend was outward rather than inward, which aligned more with someone gripping the railing or being pushed against it rather than a mass of earth and rock collapsing from outside the trail. The rangers interviewed also confirmed no recorded landslides in the area on the night of December 15th, although strong winds could cause small rock falls. Thermal cameras and helicopters during the second search phase also detected no geological traces resembling the aftermath of a landslide. Although the slide mark could have been created by a person or heavy object, there was no direct evidence indicating a landslide had occurred. The investigation team concluded that this hypothesis had low probability due to the lack of clear signs. The second hypothesis, that the three staff members left the station to repair equipment, was examined based on station operating procedures. According to the operations manual, outdoor equipment checks could be performed in response to strong wind warnings or equipment error alerts. However, the logbook entries from December 12, 15 recorded no technical issues requiring emergency repairs aside from notes about strange noises and unusual winds. The broken toolbox found at West Ridge suggested the possibility that the staff had taken tools outside the station, but the forensic team found no signs of any tools remaining in the box, nor any drop tools in the vicinity of the station. Additionally, only 2 jackets were missing from the bedroom, meaning only 2 individuals left the station fully equipped with protective gear, while the third may have stayed behind or left last without a jacket. This did not align with outdoor equipment repair procedures, which required a minimum of 2 people and full protective gear for all in strong wind conditions. The hypothesis that they left to repair equipment became even less plausible when cross-referenced with the timeline. The radio signal logs ending at 2014 and 2130 indicated that internal station operations were interrupted while the radio was transmitting, which was inconsistent with them all leaving the station together and abandoning an active radio. Furthermore, the signs of an interrupted meal, overturned chairs and cooled coffee suggested they were suddenly disrupted before dinner, rather than stepping out for planned repairs. Although the toolbox evidence created a vague connection, overall it was insufficient to support the equipment repair hypothesis. The third hypothesis, external human intervention, was initially considered the least likely because there were no signs of forced entry at the front or back doors, no foreign objects or footprints near the station when the team arrived. However, when cross-referenced with the metallic sound sequence heard by the supply team and hunters, along with the unexplained slide mark and bent railing, the investigation team had to consider the possibility of a fourth person's presence or an external force not part of standard station operations. Nevertheless, this hypothesis immediately encountered difficulties due to the absence of direct evidence of external intrusion. There were no shoe prints, no large fabric fragments, no pry marks on doors, and the station's interior showed no signs of major disturbance. The abrupt radio signal cutoff could suggest interference, but it was still insufficient to prove external presence. The logbook had a torn page, but without the missing portion, the team could not determine whether the tear was made by station staff or someone else. One notable point was Joe's notes about Caleb's tense behavior on the 13th and unfocused on the 14th, but this was not enough to conclude external intervention. However, the peripheral evidence, the bent railing, broken toolbox and large slide mark down to the crevice, clearly indicated a forceful event had occurred at West Ridge. Yet the slide mark showed no signs of an object being dragged or pursued, and no toe marks or scuff marks characteristic of a struggle. Consequently, the investigation team classified the external intervention hypothesis as cannot be ruled out but lacks evidence. When synthesizing the three hypotheses and comparing them with the collected evidence, Donovan noted that all three lacked direct verifying elements. The landslide accident had no matching geological signs, leaving the station for equipment repairs lacked sufficient logbook or physical support, and external intervention had no entry signs or characteristic evidence. Nevertheless, the evidence at West Ridge clearly proved a sudden event had occurred, causing the railing to bend, the toolbox to break, and a large slide mark to appear down to the crevice. Comparing each hypothesis with each piece of evidence showed that none fully fit or were strong enough to explain the entire sequence of events, and Sheriff Donovan had to temporarily note that the cause of the three staff members' disappearance in 1997 could not be determined based on the available data. After analyzing each hypothesis and comparing it with all the evidence collected from the Canaan Ridge station interior, the West Ridge area, and local witness statements, Sheriff Donovan and the investigation team proceeded to synthesize the results of the entire first investigation phase. The most significant result, and also the greatest limitation of the investigation, was the failure to locate any bodies or clear biological traces sufficient to confirm the presence of the three staff members after the station lost contact. Searches using SAR K9 units, helicopters, and thermal cameras recorded no signs of living persons or bodies within the expanded search radius. The slide mark at West Ridge indicated a heavy object had slid down to the rock crevice, but cameras and scanning equipment could not access deeper to verify if it was human-related. The thick snow layer also erased any possibility of direct ground tracking. The absence of bodies meant there was no basis to determine cause of death, time of death, or any signs of violence, causing the investigation to reach a major impasse from the foundational level. Regarding criminal evidence, the team collected no clear traces proving external human intervention at the station. There were no pry marks on doors, no foreign objects, no footprints, and the station interior showed no major disturbance. The unfinished meal, overturned chairs, cooled coffee, and two missing jackets all suggested unusual interruption, but were insufficient to confirm criminal activity. The clock stopped at 9:17 p.m. and the torn final page of the logbook indicated a sudden event, but it could not be determined whether it was natural, accidental, or human-caused. The broken toolbox and bent railing at West Ridge were the strongest peripheral evidence, proving a significant force impact in that area, but they did not lead to direct proof of criminal behavior. Additionally, there were no signs of resistance, violent collision, or external presence sufficient to pursue a criminal intrusion direction. Thus, the existing evidence lay on the boundary between accident, anomaly, and possible intervention, with no hypothesis strong enough to become the concluding direction. When synthesizing all data, the logbook noting strong winds and Caleb's unusual behavior, the inexplicably interrupted radio signals, the sound sequence heard by witnesses, the West Ridge evidence, and the abandoned meal, Donovan assessed that the events of the night of December 15th did not fully align with any single scenario. Natural elements like wind and terrain could explain part of the events, but not the simultaneous disappearance of three people. Conversely, the external intervention hypothesis lacked sufficiently strong evidence. The equipment repair departure hypothesis also lacked clear data from the logbook or equipment. Therefore, the final report of the first investigation clearly stated the cause of the disappearance of the 3 Canaan Ridge Station staff members on December 15, 1997, could not be determined. Donovan proposed an initial conclusion with 3 points. First, the likelihood that the 3 staff members left the station due to an unexpected event of undetermined cause. Second, no clear evidence of criminal activity. And third, no signs that they intentionally abandoned their posts. With the absence of bodies, direct traces, and physical evidence confirming any hypothesis, Donovan recommended transferring the file to insufficient basis for conclusion status, placing the case in the category of special unsolved disappearances. This was the entire conclusion reached within the scope of the 1997 investigation. After completing the synthesis of the first investigation results and determining there was insufficient basis to conclude the cause of the 3 Canaan Ridge Station staff members' disappearance, Sheriff Donovan proceeded to the final step in the 1997 case processing procedure, drafting the summary report and transferring the entire file to the state cold case unit. The final report was drafted according to the required structure, including a summary of the case developments from the time the station lost contact, the search phases and crime scene examinations, analysis of the logbook, radio data, local witness statements, and all physical evidence collected from the station interior and West Ridge area. Donovan emphasized in the report that despite numerous anomalous factors, such as the unfinished meal, clock stopped at 9:17 p.m., torn logbook page, bent railing, broken toolbox, and slide mark down to the crevice, none were sufficient to establish criminal activity or construct a consistent scenario for the events of December 15. SAR, K9, and helicopter search lines recorded no bodies or signs of living persons. The 14-minute radio signal gap and cutoff at 21:30 were noted in the report, but could not be linked to a specific agent. Thus, Donovan concluded that the case had no viable investigation direction at the present time. After completing the analysis section, he compiled an evidence inventory including the logbook, clock, coffee pot, overturned chairs, broken toolbox, small fabric samples, and collected snow and metal samples. All evidence was resealed before being placed in storage, accompanied by case identification tags to ensure future retrievability. Search grid maps, scene photographs, interview recordings, and all radio data were backed up in 2 independent copies, one retained at the sheriff's office and one sent to the cold case unit to prevent loss. The final report was signed by Donovan in late December 1997, stating the case status, cause of disappearance undetermined. Insufficient evidence for criminal prosecution, recommend transferring file to cold case status, pending new data. After submitting the report to the Randolph County Prosecutor's Office for administrative review, Donovan contacted the West Virginia State Cold Case Unit, notifying them that the case met conditions for long-term storage, no viable leads within 30 days, no additional witnesses, and no bodies located. The cold case unit accepted the entire file, assigned a new case code in the storage system, and noted that the Canaan Ridge disappearance would be periodically reviewed if new data emerged or forensic analysis technology advanced in the future. Transferring the file to cold case marked the end of active investigation in 1997, as all available resources had been deployed without decisive results. Donovan closed the file at the sheriff's office per procedure, marked it complete, and shifted the case to pending new data, a status it would maintain for many years to come. After the Canaan Ridge disappearance file was transferred to the cold case unit, the final step of 1997 was to fully implement the storage and sealing procedure for evidence according to West Virginia state standards. All evidence collected during the first investigation phase was taken to temporary storage at the sheriff's office before transfer to the main cold case unit warehouse. First, the evidence team resealed each item independently. The logbook was placed in a moisture-proof bag, sealed with an identification tag, and heat-sealed to prevent paper oxidation. The broken metal toolbox was surface cleaned using non-invasive procedures, then placed in a hard plastic box to prevent metal edges from damaging other evidence. The audio cassette, containing internal radio logs from the station's final operating hours, was sealed in an anti-magnetic box to prevent data damage. Each piece of evidence was assigned a chain of custody card with the collector's name, collection time, discovery location, and classification purpose. Next, the photography team cataloged all scene images taken throughout the investigation. Interior station photos, meal table layout, overturned chair positions, clock stopped at 9:17 p.m., logbook images before and after opening, bent railing at West Ridge, broken toolbox, slide marked down to the crevice, and panoramic views of search areas. Each image was assigned a sequential code with coordinates and timestamp. The photos were backed up in 3 formats: one large print set in the evidence file, one digital set on the sheriff's office server, and one recorded on optical disc for the cold case unit to avoid reliance on a single storage source. All video footage from helicopters, SR and thermal cameras was transferred to dedicated hard drives, sealed and coded separately by device to distinguish spatial and thermal data. Upon completing evidence classification, the records team proceeded to multi-layer packaging per standards: inner moisture-proof bag, middle hard plastic box, and outer carton sealed with anti-tamper labels. The cartons were clearly labeled with the case code Canaan Ridge Missing Personnel, 1997, including an internal evidence inventory for easy cold case unit verification when reopened. Small items like fabric fragments from near the crevice and metal samples from the bent railing point were placed in micro-evidence tubes with special seals for fragile items. The storage team noted that snow samples had melted during transport as expected, retaining only sealed water samples for potential future composition comparison. Subsequently, the final storage protocol was drafted, including the full evidence inventory, preservation status, storage location, and supervising personnel. The protocol also recorded that no evidence was damaged during collection and transport, except for items already damaged such as the dented toolbox or torn page logbook. At the end of the day, all evidence cartons along with photographic records and digital data were transported by specialized vehicle to the cold case unit storage facility in Charleston, where they were placed in long-term storage. The storage procedure concluded when the warehouse manager signed for receipt of evidence and filed the case under unresolved missing cases, priority review deferred. From that point, the Canaan Ridge disappearance entered a dormant phase, awaiting new data or more advanced forensic analysis technology in the future. In 2020, nearly 23 years after the disappearance case at Canaan Ridge Station was classified as a cold case and archived in the West Virginia State Storage, the area unexpectedly became the focus once again when a rare landslide occurred following days of heavy rainfall. The event began in mid-April when a team of workers from the State Forestry Service was assigned to assess damage on the trails in the northwestern section along the edge of Monongahela National Forest. A portion of the slope connecting the West Ridge area, which had been part of the 1997 search grid, was severely eroded, causing soil and rocks to collapse and expose underlying geological layers that had never been accessible from the surface before. As the team moved in to inspect, one of the workers spotted a small white object protruding from the freshly exposed soil. At first, he thought it was a piece of animal bone, which was not uncommon in the National Forest area. However, when he bent down to pick it up and examined it more closely, he realized the bone structure did not resemble animal bone, but rather human bone, specifically a section of an arm bone with a characteristic shape at the joint head. Recognizing the anomaly, he immediately called his colleagues over to verify. As they carefully dug around the surrounding soil, following minimal disturbance procedures to avoid contaminating the scene, they uncovered 2 additional small bone fragments, one identified as part of a rib and the other most likely belonging to a hand bone. The most notable detail was that along with the bones, they found a piece of dark blue jacket fabric, still retaining a rusted metal zipper, but with the overall shape still recognizable. Immediately, the team supervisor ordered all activities to stop and established a restricted area to temporarily secure the scene. Thanks to satellite communication equipment, the group quickly reported back to the State Forestry Service office and forwarded the information to the Randolph County Sheriff's Department. When Sheriff Donovan, who was no longer in office but for whom the Canaan Ridge file remained the most memorable case, was informed that human skeletal remains have just been found at West Ridge, he immediately contacted his successor and the cold case unit to remind them that this location was directly within the area where the 1997 slide mark had appeared. The county police sent a team to secure the scene, but due to the potential connection to a federal missing persons case occurring on federal infrastructure, they were required to report it to the FBI in accordance with regulations issued after years of reforming missing persons investigation procedures. The FBI field office in Pittsburgh received the initial information and determined that the incident was linked to a cold case spanning more than 2 decades, giving them sufficient jurisdiction to intervene. A federal investigation team was dispatched to Monongahela the very next day. Upon arriving at the scene, the FBI established a perimeter with a 200-meter radius around the bone discovery point and required the workers to stay outside to avoid disturbing the exposed soil layer after the landslide. Forensic technicians began collecting each bone fragment using specialized tools, documenting the position, depth and condition of each sample. Based on the brittleness of the bones, the adhering soil, and the degree of decomposition, they determined that the skeleton had been buried for many years, consistent with the time frame of the 1997 disappearance. However, bones alone were not sufficient to confirm identity, and the FBI requested a full forensic profile. What was particularly notable was that the jacket fragment recovered near the bones was dark blue, and matched the style of the standard jackets issued to Canaan Ridge Station personnel at that time. Although it could not yet be determined whose jacket it was, the fact that 2 jackets had been reported missing from the bedroom in 1997 led the FBI to flag this evidence as a key link between the new scene and the old file. The fabric piece was carefully sealed, with special attention paid to the rusted zipper and the intact fiber structure, as they could contain distinctive features for comparison with the station's equipment records. While cleaning the surface soil around the bone discovery area, the forensic team also found a small metal object about 1 meter away, the zipper pull detached from the jacket, matching the fabric piece just recovered. This metal object showed signs of deformation as if it had been subjected to strong impact before falling to the ground. This discovery made the area even more significant because it indicated that the jacket may have been pulled or subjected to strong force before ending up in that location. The forensic team documented the entire area with scene photographs and 3D terrain scans to preserve the post-landslide topography for later analysis. On the same day, the FBI contacted the cold case unit to request access to the 1997 evidence files for comparison with the newly found bone and fabric samples. They particularly noted the list of jackets missing from the station bedroom, as the new evidence could match one of the 2 disappeared jackets. In an internal report, the FBI clearly stated high probability of connection to the Canaan Ridge missing personnel case, 1997. Once all procedures were established, the FBI officially sent a notification requesting the cold case unit to reactivate the disappearance file to support forensic comparison and expanded scene analysis. This marked the first time since 1997 that the case file was reopened as an active investigation. The bone samples were immediately transferred to the FBI Forensic Laboratory for analysis, first to confirm they were human, next to determine age and sex, and finally, if sufficient samples were available, to extract DNA for comparison with the 1997 victims' profiles. While sampling continued, the on-site forensic team kept sifting through the nearby soil and rocks, using specialized screening frames to search for additional bone fragments or personal items that may have been buried over time. They discovered a few very small fabric pieces, similar in color to the main jacket fragment, but more decomposed. These pieces were collected for fiber analysis. The presence of multiple fabric fragments in the same area led the FBI to note the possibility that the jacket was torn during the body's fall into the crevice, an important detail for analyzing the sequence of events. As the sun set, the scene was equipped with lighting, and the forensic team set up overnight watch to ensure no one outside the investigation team could access the area. The Randolph County Police assisted by rerouting trail traffic to prevent hikers or visitors from accidentally entering. Late in the evening, the FBI drafted a preliminary report to headquarters, stating, "The evidence discovered at West Ridge has a very high likelihood of belonging to one of the 3 victims in the Canaan Ridge disappearance. The investigation file needs to be reopened for in-depth analysis." With this notification, the Canaan Ridge disappearance file, which had lain dormant in the cold case unit for more than 2 decades, was officially reactivated. At the FBI Forensic Laboratory in Quantico, the bone samples recovered from West Ridge were quickly placed into priority analysis processing after the Canaan Ridge disappearance file was reactivated. The forensic team began by cleaning the specimens using non-invasive methods, employing soft brushes and ultrasonic waves to remove adhering soil from the surface without abrading the bone structure. The arm bone was processed first as it was the largest and least decomposed. When placed under a digital microscope, the forensic team observed that the bone structure clearly indicated an adult human, with the shoulder joint head characteristic of an individual aged 25 to 40. For precise identification, they measured bone length and ratio indices, then entered them into an anthropometric model comparison system. The results showed a high match with male sex, within the height range corresponding to one of the 3 missing station personnel from 1997. However, anthropometrics alone were insufficient. The forensic team then proceeded to extract DNA from the bone marrow, the part best preserved under long-term burial conditions. Despite more than 2 decades, the marrow still yielded sufficient DNA for extraction due to the low temperatures in the West Ridge area. When the DNA was analyzed and compared to the archived data from the cold case unit, the results showed a match with the DNA profile of Joe Lasker, the data logging technician at Canaan Ridge Station. Confirming the identity of remains #1 marked the first time since 1997 that direct evidence emerged regarding the fate of one of the 3 missing personnel. Immediately after identity confirmation, the forensic team shifted to analyzing fracture patterns and trauma signs on the skeleton. The arm bone, the most intact sample, showed a long oblique fracture, not due to natural decomposition, but characteristic of a high-impact force break. The fracture was wide, with displaced fragments and sharp edges, indicating direct strong force applied, while the bone still contained soft tissue. A rib fragment found near the arm bone also exhibited similar fracturing, a wide horizontal crack with slight twisting, typical of trauma from frontal or side impact. When placing the 2 fracture samples on a 3D reconstruction model, the forensic team concluded that the fractures did not match the pattern of injuries from a free fall into a crevice, which typically causes shattering or multiple cracks from vertical rebound force. Instead, the fractures indicated force with a clear direction, as if the bone had been struck hard against a rigid object with a surface smaller than the human body. The forensic team continued examining smaller bone samples, including the hand bone fragment. Under magnification, they observed compression cracks on the hand bone, a sign commonly seen when a person raises their hand to block or resist an incoming blow. Though only a small fragment, it clearly showed signs of a defensive reflex. This was a critical factor because defensive reflexes do not occur in purely accidental cases, especially falls from height, where the victim typically loses complete control. The forensic team also analyzed bone decomposition to check for pathological signs or other environmental impacts. There were no indications of animal gnawing or cutting by sharp tools. This further reinforced that the force causing the fractures was direct impact, not post-mortem decomposition. Notably, when examining the jacket fabric found near the remains, the forensic team noted irregular tearing, the fibers separated horizontally, not torn by gravity or natural stretching. Textile forensic specialists examined the fabric structure and determined that the tear pattern matched impact from a blunt, rigid object, most likely a metal object with a protruding surface. This significantly aligned with the broken metal toolbox previously found at West Ridge, though no direct evidence yet linked the two items. Additionally, the deformed zipper showed the jacket had undergone strong twisting force, possibly occurring when the body was rotated or pulled rapidly in a sudden impulse. Another important detail was the location where the bone fragments were found. Due to terrain changes after the landslide, the forensic team had to calculate based on geological models to estimate the original likely position of the body. Based on slide momentum and the direction of the newly collapsed soil layer, they estimated the body had likely been buried several meters deeper inside the crevice, near where the 1997 slide mark was discovered. This partially proved that the recorded slide mark was not caused by an animal or inanimate object. Although the exact body movement at the time of death could not be determined, the fracture patterns and impact directions indicated the body sustained one or more strong blows while still alive or at the moment of death. Synthesizing all data, the forensic team reached three key conclusions. First, remains #1 was definitively identified as Joe Lasker. Second, the bone fractures exhibited characteristics of external high-force trauma with defensive signs, inconsistent with a natural fall accident. And third, the injuries were not the result of decomposition or environmental conditions. These conclusions were included in the official forensic report and forwarded to the Cold Case Unit and FBI Field Office. In the report, the forensic team clearly stated, "The bone samples and physical evidence are inconsistent with a terrain accident death scenario. The fracture characteristics and fabric tears indicate signs of strong force impact, potentially related to violent action." This was the first time since 1997 that direct forensic evidence emerged, showing that the death of one of the three personnel was not a natural accident, a discovery capable of completely changing the direction of the Canaan Ridge disappearance investigation. When the forensic report confirmed that the remains found at West Ridge were Joe Lasker, and that the bone injuries were inconsistent with a natural accident, the Cold Case Unit officially issued the decision to reopen the Canaan Ridge disappearance file and activate a second investigation. The first time in more than 2 decades that the case was treated as potentially involving violent elements. To ensure all aspects of the case were examined simultaneously, a multidisciplinary investigation team was formed, including representatives from the FBI, Cold Case Unit, bone forensic experts, terrain analysis specialists, radio equipment experts, and 2 officers who had participated in the original 1997 investigation to accurately reconstruct the context. The initial meeting was held in Charleston, where all old and new data were laid out, starting from the sealed 1997 evidence to the items newly discovered in 2020. The investigation team's first task was to review all old evidence. The torn-page logbook was re-examined under infrared lighting to check for faint ink traces or remaining pen pressure marks. The clock stopped at 9:17 p.m. was further tested to determine whether the hand stopped due to impact or simply falling onto the table. The broken metal toolbox was reanalyzed for impact force, compared to simulations of the force causing Joe's bone fractures to see if there was any correlation between the evidence and the injuries. The small fabric piece found at West Ridge in 1997 was also subjected to new fiber analysis technology compared to the 2020 jacket fragment to determine if they shared the same origin. The investigation team simultaneously reopened all old scene photographs, including the station layout, the unfinished dinner table, overturned chairs, and the entire West Ridge area before the landslide. They paid special attention to the distance between the bent railing and the slide mark location, calculating the possibility that an object or person had slid down before heavy snow cover. Photographs of the railing curve showed that the steel bar bend matched force pushing from inside the trail, not pulling from outside. This evidence was categorized as object subjected to strong force related to fall direction. After evaluating the evidence, the investigation team moved to reconstructing the timeline from December 12 to 15, 1997, based on combined information, logbook radio data, supply team statements, weather notes, and local witnesses. The timeline was divided into 3 phases: before the supply team arrived, after they left, and the radio interruption phase. The phase before the supply team arrived was relatively stable. The logbook noted strong winds and unusual behavior from Caleb, but no clear events. The phase after the supply team left the station around 16 o'clock was critically important because this was the period when the 3 personnel were still assumed to be alive and operating normally. The 19 o'clock radio transmission sent by Joe confirmed no major interruptions. All unusual events began at the 1930 mark when the automatic transmission failed. The investigation team focused on the 14-minute gap between 20 o'clock and 2014, the time the system recorded a partial ping. They viewed this as the most likely window, coinciding with a sudden event inside the station. The reconstructed timeline noted 19 o'clock, last full radio transmission sent 1930. No automatic transmission, possibly equipment or human interruption. 20 o'clock, continued no signal. 2014, partial ping, indicating the device started transmitting but was cut off. 21 o'clock, no manual transmission. 21:30, final signal abruptly cut. When cross-referencing this timeline with the clock stopped at 9:17 p.m., the investigation team noted a striking coincidence approximately 13 minutes before the final signal. This led them to flag 21:17 as a critical time in the sequence. The radio analysis team simulated scenarios that could cause a partial ping, such as yanking the power cord, sudden shutdown, or physical impact to the device, and compared the electronic waveforms to those recorded in 1997. The results showed that the 2014 partial ping and the 21:30 signal cutoff matched patterns from physical impact to the equipment. Once the timeline was reconstructed, the investigation team reanalyzed the supply team's statements to identify matching times. The metallic sound they heard around 16:03 was classified as potentially related to the broken toolbox location. The logbook note about metallic sound was also added to the timeline for comparison with the distant sound witnesses heard. The investigation team also reviewed wind conditions in the 2 days before loss of contact to better understand why the logbook recorded unusual wind direction changes, a point matching camper statements. During the timeline review, the investigation team worked to pinpoint when Joe may have been injured or fallen into the crevice. Based on bone decomposition degree and fabric fragment locations, they estimated the event occurred on the day contact was lost or very shortly after. From this, the team placed the 20 o'clock, 21:30 window on the list of timeframes most directly related to Joe's injuries. The timeline reconstruction concluded when the investigation team established a much clearer temporal structure than the 1997 report. Unusual events occurred in a tight, non-random sequence. The complete timeline was entered into the reopened case file, serving as the foundation for all subsequent analysis steps. After the timeline was meticulously reconstructed based on radio data, new physical evidence, and forensic reports, the investigation team turned to one of the most important remaining documents from 1997, the Canaan Ridge Station Operations Logbook, the notebook that recorded all events during the 3 final days before the 3 employees went missing. Although it had been examined multiple times in 1997, the technology at the time was not advanced enough to analyze faded ink layers, hidden pen marks, or content that had been written and then erased. With modern technology, particularly multispectral scanners, AI handwriting recognition, and pen stroke reconstruction systems, the investigation team hoped to recover information that was previously unreadable, including the content of the torn-out page. To begin, they fed each page of the logbook into the multispectral scanner using wavelengths from 365 nanometers to 1000 nanometers to separate faded ink layers or those obscured by dirt marks. The pages for December 12 and 13 quickly revealed some faint pen strokes that were invisible to the naked eye. When processed with contrast enhancement algorithms, the team discovered an added note in the margin of the 12/13 page. The content almost completely faded. Caleb said he heard, "Last night, not sure from where." Although the note was incomplete, the sentence structure indicated that Joe or Ethan had jotted down something related to an unusual sound that Caleb heard before the day they disappeared. This note was flagged because it might relate to the metallic sounds reported by local witnesses. Continuing the scan to the December 14th page, the device detected a very faint ink layer at the bottom of the page, where it had previously been considered blank. After nearly an hour of image processing, the text became clearer. Wind changed direction twice, not like the area wind pattern, Joe worried. This note did not match any stored meteorological data from 1997, as weather records showed no unusual wind direction changes in that time frame. This led the investigation team to hypothesize that the three employees may have observed a phenomenon not recorded by the forecasting system or the weather station down the mountain, or they described the phenomenon differently from standard data. Continuing the analysis of the December 15th page, the team noticed a smeared ink area in the right corner, previously thought to be caused by water or snow wetting the page. But when using infrared wavelengths, the AI system detected overlapping pen strokes, proving that the page originally had additional entries that someone had attempted to erase by wiping the ink while it was still wet. This was not noted in the 1997 report because tools at the time could not detect ink traces beneath the smear. After reconstructing the pen stroke structure, the system recovered part of the erased content. Second sound louder. Joe went out to check. This note drew particular attention because it indicated that Joe, the victim whose body had just been identified, may have stepped outside the station right before the main event occurred, something not inferred in the old records. Joe, leaving the station, explained why dinner preparation was left unfinished. They may have been interrupted by an unexpected sound. The investigation team flagged this content as part of the information potentially directly related to the events leading to the disappearance. They then moved on to analyzing the torn-out page, the biggest question from 1997. Although the page had been torn from the logbook, the team still had the remaining paper fibers at the edge of the book. By 3D scanning the paper edge and analyzing the tear structure with edge-matching algorithms, they could determine the tear direction, speed, and even the force applied by the person tearing it. Results showed the page was torn from bottom to top in a right-handed pulling motion with strong force. This was important information because Joe was left-handed. Ethan was right-handed but wrote very lightly, while Caleb was described as writing strongly and pressing hard on the pen. Since the tear was clean and decisive in a right-handed direction, the team placed Caleb as a likely candidate for tearing the page. However, no conclusion could be reached without the original page for content comparison. When analyzing handwriting, the team used over 40 samples from all three employees to build models simulating their writing habits. AI compared each pen stroke in the logbook to the original samples to identify the writer for each section. Results confirmed: Joe wrote most of the technical notes and data, Ethan wrote notes about wind and equipment status, while Caleb only wrote a few short notes, mostly in the margins or personal sections. Notably, at some points on the 12/15 page, there were two distinct overlapping strokes, a light one writing "wind stronger," and a heavier one, almost pressing into the paper, writing "not right." AI concluded the heavy strokes were Caleb's. This indicated tension or instability had emerged inside the station before the radio interruption. The investigation team continued to recover overlapped ink areas using wavelength-based ink layer separation. When the two distinct ink layers were separated, part of the obscured content appeared clearly. Joe said someone at the door. Both went to check. This note, though incomplete, was determined to be written by Ethan. This led the team to flag it as one of the most important pieces of information ever recovered from the logbook. If accurate, the three employees left the station not randomly, but as a direct response to an event or person outside, something never concluded in the 1997 records. Upon completing the analysis, the investigation team summarized the key findings. Multiple lines of text were hidden, wiped, or overwritten in the logbook. The recovered content showed the three employees heard multiple consecutive strange sounds. Joe and Ethan most likely went outside to check before the main event. And Caleb's handwriting appeared in rushed, urgent notes corresponding to a state of tension. This was the first time the logbook, a piece of evidence once considered to have no breakthrough value, revealed clear details about the events before the station lost contact, opening an entirely new perspective for the second investigation. In parallel with the high-tech analysis of the logbook, the investigation team turned to the second important piece of evidence that had been overlooked in 1997. The cassette tape recording the internal radio logs of the Canaan Ridge station. This cassette had been properly collected and sealed, but 1990s audio restoration technology could not separate noise, reconstruct distorted waveforms, or detect background sounds outside the human hearing range. In 2020, with advancements in multispectral audio restoration, AI speech recognition, and machine learning-based noise filtering, the FBI decided to unseal the cassette, scan the full frequency range, and convert it into raw audio data for millisecond by millisecond analysis. As soon as the tape was loaded into the system, the audio engineering team noticed stronger than normal background noise that was uneven over time, something that occurs when the original signal contained unusual sound vibrations. They began running layered high-frequency noise filtering algorithms, then used waveform reconstruction models to restore broken segments. The recording from morning until 1855 showed nothing unusual beyond standard station radio chatter, background wind, and technical reports sent by Joe Lasker. However, the segment from 1910 to 1930 had strange background noise, sounds resembling light metallic rattling, matching the metallic sounds described in supply team statements and the content just recovered from the logbook. The audio team flagged this segment as unusual noise region type A. At 1930, the time the automatic report failed to reach the Elkins station, the tape showed a very short silence, followed by a series of low-frequency sounds resembling a door slamming hard, but obscured by wind. Volume enhancement algorithms on the background revealed that sound was not a normal station door closing, but had a stronger vibration, as if the door was pushed or struck against a hard object. This point drew the team's attention because it matched the hypothesis of a strong event impacting the station before radio signals were interrupted. In the segment from 20 o'clock to 2014, the time of the recorded partial ping, the team discovered something unexpected. Beneath thick noise and prolonged wind, there was a very faint but structured sound resembling a human voice. They isolated frequencies and maximized volume within safe limits to avoid distorting the original. The result was a sound lasting less than half a second, structured like rapid breathing or a very short shout. Experts compared it to voice samples of Joe, Ethan, and Caleb from familiar radio segments. The sound did not match any of the three men's voices. This was the first time a fourth voice was suspected within the station's range. The analysis continued to the 2014 to 2018 segment, the time of the partial ping. After noise filtering and frequency band separation, they detected very faint intermittent sounds characteristic of the radio microphone being touched or pulled from its position. In the background, using a speech presence probability algorithm, the system determined a high likelihood of short human speech syllables. When amplifying the band and processing with AI speech recognition, the model identified acoustic structure consistent with a muffled scream or a choked voice. Although the exact content could not be determined, experts flagged this as Type B audio evidence, part of the related to scuffle or physical confrontation group. When the tape reached 2110, near the clock stop time of 9:17 p.m., background noise spiked unusually in a sawtooth pattern, like a microphone suddenly shaken. The analysis team ran a shock event noise filtering model used for reconstructing audio in accident recordings or strong impacts. Results showed three distinct sounds beneath the noise: a heavy object striking a hard surface, a very faint dragging sound, and a background sound resembling rapid speech in about 0.2 seconds. The issue was that this voice was too low and did not match any of the 3 employees' samples. The AI system cross-checked again and confirmed the 4th voice match was no more than 10% with anyone in the station. This made the investigation team nearly certain that at least one outsider was present within the radio microphone's range. At the final segment 21:30, the time radio signals were completely cut. The cassette recorded a strong sound sequence, lasting about 1 second before falling silent. Millisecond by millisecond waveform analysis showed the final sound was neither wind, nor the microphone dropping, nor a door closing. It had characteristics of a collision between 2 hard objects, one low tone and one higher, like steel striking steel. This recalled the broken metal toolbox found at West Ridge. After completing the analysis, the audio team compiled all data into 6 preliminary conclusions. 1. The cassette contained multiple unusual noise regions not matching natural wind. 2. At least 3 strong impact sounds appeared exactly in time frames identified as critical by the timeline. 3. Clear audio evidence of scuffle or physical contact never detected in 1997. 4. At least 2 segments with human voices not matching Joe, Ethan, or Caleb. 5. 1 segment resembling a muffled scream suggesting possible restraint or violence in the station. 6. The final sound sequence at 21:30, coinciding with radio cutoff, had characteristics of strong metal collision, matching the broken toolbox evidence. This was the first time the cassette, previously dismissed due to poor quality, indicated the possible presence of a voice from someone not part of the station. The discovery of the 4th voice was considered a major turning point in the second investigation, as if confirmed, it proved the 3 Canaan Ridge employees did not simply suffer an accident, but had direct contact with at least one other person right before disappearing. After the cassette analysis revealed the 4th voice along with clear signs of scuffle, the investigation team moved to expand terrain searches using modern technology, high-resolution drones combined with LiDAR, to identify areas of soil and rock that may have been significantly displaced from 1997 to 2020. The goal of this phase was to reconstruct the original terrain of West Ridge and related slopes, comparing it to the post-2020 landslide terrain to pinpoint locations likely to have concealed bodies or evidence before erosion exposed the first clues. The deployment began early in the morning when the technical team set up 3 specialized LiDAR drones capable of creating 3D maps with error under 3 centimeters. The drones were programmed to scan the entire area from the edge of West Ridge to the rock crevice where a slide mark was discovered in 1997 and to the 2020 landslide area. In the first 2 hours, the drones collected millions of data points on elevation, slope, vegetation density, and rock distribution. When the data was transferred to the station computer, terrain reconstruction software compared the 2020 map with the 1997 map built from old scene photos and Forestry Service terrain models. Both maps were synchronized by GPS coordinates for precise overlay. Differences appeared immediately in the area marked 1997 rock crevice. The 2020 map showed the crevice nearly 1 meter deeper than the old model. This was consistent with landslide and erosion over more than 2 decades. However, analyzing the 1997 data layer, technicians noticed an anomaly in the old model. A section of the slope above the crevice had a slight convex bulge, forming a natural ledge about 3 meters long. By 2020, this ledge was completely gone. LiDAR analysis showed the displaced soil had slid downward, carrying a significant amount of small rocks. This led the team to note the area as a region of soil likely to have once covered evidence. Moving to the area near the 1997 curved railing, the LiDAR terrain model detected an uneven subsidence stretch nearly 6 meters long down the mountainside. This subsidence pattern was not consistent with natural weather-induced sinking. It was concave in a direction from the trail downward, resembling a spot where a heavy object fell and weakened the soil, later eroded by rain over years. Comparing this slide path to the location of the broken toolbox, the team found the slope and direction nearly matched. The 2020 LiDAR model also showed the Joe Lasker body discovery site as a convergence point of soil movement from two different slope branches, indicating the body may have initially fallen from a higher position before being carried downward by soil and rocks. This matched the hypothesis that the body was not in its original position but displaced over 23 years. During analysis, the LiDAR drones detected another anomaly about 14 meters north of the body discovery site. This was an elliptical depression about 20 centimeters deep, with lower small rock density than surrounding areas. Data indicated this depression was not a natural pit, but showed signs of strong compression when the soil was soft. The technical team flagged this as a suspect compression point. Overlaying the 1997 terrain map onto the 2020 map, the team found this compression point coincided with a heat signature loss region recorded during 1997 helicopter searches. Combining data, the team questioned whether the heat loss at the time was due to weather or soil covering an object, preventing camera detection. Meanwhile, the LiDAR drones detected vegetation layer breaks, signs of vegetation structure disrupted in long paths from the curved railing area down to the rock crevice. These paths are now covered by new vegetation, but LiDAR could penetrate the canopy to detect underlying soil structure. This path ran nearly exactly along the 1997 recorded slide mark, strengthening the hypothesis of a heavy object or person sliding down this route. Analyzing the slide vector forces, simulation software showed the path matched an adult human weight more than natural falling rocks. This reinforced forensic conclusions that Joe experienced strong impact before falling. Additionally, the drone detected an area south of West Ridge with higher large rock density than the area standard. This could be rocks washed down from the cliff over years of erosion, but also possibly rocks dislodged from impact sites. This data was added for further analysis, as evidence scattered from a body during a scuffle could fall in similar positions. Compiling the LiDAR data, the technical team reconstructed a nearly accurate 1997 terrain model. The original curved railing location, toolbox fall site, original slide mark position, and slope areas likely to have concealed bodies or evidence. From this, the investigation team identified 4 areas to prioritize. 1. The lost soil ledge, likely to have contained evidence or body hash, 2. Before sliding. 2. The suspect depression, non-natural soil compression. 3. The vegetation break path, heavy object movement axis. 4. The abnormal rock accumulation area, rocks converged from multiple directions. This was the first time since 1997 that the investigation team had a detailed comparative terrain map to pinpoint locations likely concealing or displacing evidence. Thanks to drones and LiDAR, they not only reconstructed West Ridge as it was 23 years earlier, but also identified key positions that 1997 ground searches could not access or notice due to snow cover. The successful terrain data collection and modeling provided the team with a far more scientifically accurate basis to direct the next search steps. After the terrain unit completed the LiDAR analysis and identified 4 key points likely to conceal a body or evidence, the investigation team immediately moved to the targeted excavation phase. The top priority was the area of a land ledge that existed in 1997 but had completely disappeared in the 2020 model. A point assessed as likely having experienced a small landslide before the 2020 slide swept away the upper part of the slope. As the forensic geology team dug through the compacted soil layer beneath the surface, just about an hour later, they uncovered a small bone segment protruding from under the rock debris. Based on its distinctive curved structure, the forensic expert quickly determined it was part of an adult human rib. The area was immediately marked as suspected location number 2, and the entire investigation team shifted to a meticulous excavation process following an anatomical model, similar to excavating a single grave. As the soil layers were peeled back centimeter by centimeter, clearer signs emerged: a femur bone broken into 2 sections, a piece of grayish-silver fabric matching the material of the standard jacket issued to weather station technicians, and a largely decomposed shoe fragment, but with the rubber sole still identifiable. Based on the position and depth, the forensic team concluded that the second body was likely intact beneath the soil layer, buried for many years due to a natural landslide. As the excavation continued, the skull appeared. Though heavily decomposed, it still retained its overall shape. Before collecting samples, the forensic team set up a protective frame and marked all bone positions to determine the body's posture at the time of burial. The posture was on its side, with both arms bent near the front of the body and the legs positioned under rock debris in a direction sloping downward. This was not a typical posture for someone who died from a natural fall, as high-fall accidents on terrain like West Ridge usually result in the body lying prone or supine, stretched out due to inertial force. The curled side posture suggested the victim may have fallen in an uncontrolled state, but was rotated by external impact or by hitting a surface before the fall. When the jawbone was recovered, the forensic team noticed a vertical crack running from the chin area down to the jaw angle. This crack was splinter-like, not the fragmented type caused by falling onto rock, and the fracture line was sharper than a natural break. This was an indication of strong impact from a hard object prior to death. The entire skeleton was fully excavated within 4 hours and transported to the mobile laboratory set up right at the base of the slope for preliminary examination before transfer to Quantico. Based on bone size, femur length, and a rapid DNA sample from the bone marrow, the victim's identity was confirmed as Ethan Merrick, the technician responsible for the mechanical systems at the Canaan Ridge station. The discovery of Ethan's body marked the second victim found at West Ridge, proving that the 1997 incident was not accidental or related to a single individual. The aspect that drew the investigation team's primary focus to Ethan's body was the condition of the bones, showing distinctly different trauma compared to Joe's bones. As the forensic team conducted detailed analysis of the fractures, they noted that Ethan's right arm bone had a semicircular indentation, approximately 2.5 centimeters in diameter, with clean edges and uniform depth. This indentation matched the pattern of impact from a metal object with rounded edges. When comparing the impact angle, they found the force direction was diagonal from above downward, consistent with a scenario where the victim was struck with a hard object while facing the assailant. On the skull, specifically the left temporal region, there was a complex fracture consisting of 3 branches, forming a 3-pointed star shape. This fracture pattern is a typical characteristic in cases where the head is struck by an object with small mass but high density, such as a small steel hammer or a solid metal bar. Combining these data, the forensic team proposed the possibility Ethan had been attacked with a metal object, not a natural rock. At this point, the investigation team revisited the 1997 evidence, the broken metal toolbox found at West Ridge. The box once contained various tools, such as a small hammer, pry bar, screws, and pliers. A forensic tool expert was brought to the scene to directly examine the recovered metal fragments. When he reassembled the broken pieces, he noticed an unusual curve on one edge of the box, similar to the curvature caused by strong impact force. More importantly, among the tool fragments recovered in 1997, a small metal piece about 4 centimeters long, recorded at the time only as an unidentified fragment, was re-examined under a microscope. It had a slightly curved surface with a diameter closely matching the indentation on Ethan's arm bone. When overlaying the 3D projection of the metal fragment onto the bone indentation model, the match reached 83%, sufficient to consider it as a potential object that caused the injury. Additionally, the zipper pull found near Joe's body had a similar dent as if struck by a heavy metal object, a small detail but indicating the murder weapon may have been used multiple times or in different situations. The forensic team continued comparing the metal fragment to the structure of tools issued to the Canaan Ridge station based on the 1997 inventory list. They determined the fragment was likely the broken tip of a pry bar used to secure outdoor equipment. This was a tool with a solid metal handle, heavy enough to cause severe trauma but compact enough to be wielded with one hand. Notably, in the toolbox found in 1997, the pry bar was missing. At the time, investigators thought it was lost, but current data suggested it likely broke during the attack. When evaluating the overall injuries on Ethan's body, the investigation team noted multiple fractures that were not from falling onto rock, as these fractures were concentrated, with clear directional force, and inconsistent with a natural fall pattern. The left-hand bones showed signs of defensive wounds, similar to Joe's, indicating Ethan had raised his hands to face the blows. The right collarbone had a transverse crack, a fracture type often seen when the victim is struck on the shoulder with a solid object. This further reinforced the assessment that there was a struggle prior to death, and the murder weapon was very likely one of the metal tools from the box. Also, during the excavation, the forensic team found a very small piece of dark blue fabric caught between two rock crevices near the body position. When analyzing the fiber sample, they determined it belonged to the same material group as Joe's jacket and similar to the jackets issued to Ethan. This suggested Ethan's jacket was likely torn during the struggle. Combining all the data, the second body buried deeper than Joe's, with signs of being covered by a landslide after the main event, injuries clearly showing violence, and the metal fragment from the toolbox likely being the murder weapon, the investigation team determined this was the strongest evidence to date, indicating direct assault on at least two of the three missing employees. Ethan's body, and the injuries on the bones, advanced the case a significant step. The 1997 incident could no longer be viewed as a terrain accident, but involved intentional force with a metal object. The discovery of the second body reinforced the assessment that the West Ridge area was the epicenter of the violent event that occurred on the night of December 15, 1997. After the second body was excavated and signs of violence were confirmed, the investigation team moved to the most critical phase of the reinvestigation, screening all potential subjects connected to the 1997 incident to identify the primary suspect. Since forensic evidence clearly showed a struggle and attack with a hard object, the investigation direction no longer focused on accident hypotheses or voluntary departure from the station, but fully shifted to a criminological model of direct contact between the perpetrator and the victims. The first step of the cold case unit was to compile a list of all individuals who could have accessed the Canaan Ridge station around December 14, 1997. This list included the supply team, rangers patrolling the area, licensed hunters operating in the zone, National Weather Service technical staff, climbers recorded in entry logs before the snowstorm, and some local residents living near the Southern Trail. The investigation team began eliminating those with absolute alibis. The supply team left the station at 16:03, a time confirmed by the transport truck's GPS timestamp and consistent statements. Cassette analysis showed the struggle sounds occurred much later, after 1930, meaning the supply team was dozens of miles away when the incident happened. The rangers, re-interviewed, all provided solid alibis. One was working at a ranger station more than 12 miles away. The other was assisting in evacuating visitors from the Eastern Trail, confirmed by radio logs. Licensed hunters recorded leaving the area in the afternoon were verified by trail traffic cameras and showed no evidence of returning at night. The weather station technical staff down the mountain were all on fixed shifts, with each present at their posts, according to electronic time clock data. At this point, most subjects on the initial list were cleared of suspicion. However, the investigation team still had to address unrecorded subjects from 1997. Individuals frequently in the forest, but outside the registration system, free roamers, illegal hunters, homeless people living in the woods, and individuals with a history of passing through the West Ridge area. To screen this group, the FBI re-examined the cassette data, specifically analyzing the fourth voice on the recording. They input the audio segment into the National Voice Recognition System to find similarities with any collected voice samples from other cases. Though the segment was too short for direct identification, the system identified characteristics: male voice, low tone, slightly hoarse, typical of someone who smoked heavily or worked in dusty environments. This was a general description, but helped narrow down suspects partially. Simultaneously, the behavioral analysis team reviewed all old case statements to find any names mentioned but not fully evaluated. Among the 1997 Ranger notes, they discovered an overlooked note about a man named Raymond Holt, who had been warned for unauthorized movement near the Canaan Ridge station about 3 weeks before the disappearance. This note was never evaluated because at the time there was no indication he was connected to the station. The cold case unit immediately pulled Raymond Holt's records. The file showed Holt lived on the outskirts of Elkins, worked as a freelance mechanic, and had a history of altercations in the national forest due to disputes with rangers over illegal animal trapping. Additionally, he had worked at a machine shop using heavy metal tools, including pry bars and tools similar in shape to the suspected murder weapon. The investigation team questioned how could Holt access the Canaan Ridge station at the time of the incident with a snowstorm approaching. To answer, they reviewed weather data and found the storm only intensified after 20 o'clock. The window from 16 o'clock to 19 o'clock, right after the supply team left, had no heavy snowfall, allowing someone familiar with forest trails like Holt to reach the station undetected. When reviewing 2020 local witness statements, the team uncovered an overlooked detail. A hunter said about a week before the storm, he saw a man walking alone toward Canaan Ridge, carrying a long cloth bag like for tools. This description matched Holt's height and build when compared to file photos. To rule out Holt's absence from the area on the night of December 15, 1997, the FBI searched his residence and schedule records. However, Holt lived alone at the time, with no one to confirm his alibi. No phone records, no credit card data, and no sightings of him in Elkins during the incident window. When cross-referencing Ranger Forest movement logs, the team noted Holt had been repeatedly spotted near West Ridge, and specifically, his usual route crossed right through the area where the broken toolbox and Joe's body were found. When assessing motive, the FBI reviewed Holt's criminal record and found a history of minor violence, an assault in 1992 and a disturbance at a campground in 1995. There was no evidence he knew the victims, but for someone with conflicts with rangers and unauthorized entry history, the possibility of him losing his temper if discovered in a restricted area could not be ruled out. Finally, the investigation team input all information into the suspect risk assessment system. After eliminating nearly 40 potential access subjects, only one remained without an alibi, with a violent record, capable of accessing the station in the relevant time frame, with a history of movement near West Ridge, and notably, with an occupation and tools potentially linked to Ethan's injury type, Raymond Holt. Based on all available data, the investigation team unanimously designated Holt as the primary subject for the next investigation phase. After Raymond Holt was identified as the primary subject through suspect screening, the investigation team moved to the most critical step, verifying biological evidence. The two evidence sources considered most promising for confirming direct contact between Holt and the victims were 1. DNA sample obtained from under Joe Lasker's fingernails during the 2020 evidence reanalysis, and 2. The hair strand collected from the West Ridge railing in 1997. But lacking technology at the time for analysis. When the evidence files were reopened, the forensic laboratory re-examined all sealed samples. During close inspection of Joe's fingernail scrapings, a sample stored in a micro-evidence box for 23 years, the forensic team discovered microscopic skin cells still adhering in the nail crevices, something 1997 technology could not process due to lack of extraction methods. Under an electron microscope, these cells appeared flaked, consistent with samples from a victim resisting, scratching, or trying to push the assailant away. The laboratory performed extraction and amplification using modern processes, eliminating cross-contamination risk with 1997 stored comparison samples. After 72 hours of analysis, the DNA sample from under Joe's fingernails was compared to the 3 victims' DNA profiles, results negative, as expected. Next, the sample was run against the National Criminal Database, CODIS, but yielded no matches. The final step was comparing this DNA sample to Raymond Holt's, legally obtained via a collection order due to his prior assault conviction. The STR analysis results prompted the entire team to call an emergency meeting. The DNA under Joe Lasker's fingernails matched Raymond Holt's DNA with an accuracy of 1 in 980 billion. This ratio is equivalent to identity confirmation in state-level murder cases, virtually eliminating error. The laboratory report stated clearly, the DNA trace indicates direct contact between Holt and victim Joe Lasker near the time of death. This discovery not only reinforced suspicion of a fourth person's presence at the station, but also proved Joe resisted enough to retain the assailant's cells under his nails. With the first DNA evidence confirmed, the investigation team proceeded to reopen the second evidence item, the hair strand found on the West Ridge railing in 1997. At the time, the hair lacked a root and contained insufficient genetic material for STR analysis of that era. However, in 2020, rootless hair sequencing technology allowed DNA analysis in the keratin layer, even without a follicle. The laboratory decoded the hair using long-read sequencing, a highly sensitive technique yielding multiple usable DNA segments. When input into the comparison system, results showed significant sequence overlaps with Holt's sample. For accuracy, the laboratory performed a second analysis using multi-locus segment separation. Results replicated the hair-matched Raymond Holt with a probability of 1 in 4.1 trillion. More importantly, the hair's discovery location right on the bent railing, evidence initially viewed as a strong impact mark. The technical team's 3D scene reconstruction showed Holt's hair likely adhered to the railing during direct bodily contact, such as during a struggle or when the assailant was pushed. Notably, the hair was at the most bent section, suggesting strong force impacted the railing while both assailant and victim were present. This hair sample was independent evidence, collected in 1997, immediately sealed, and untouched for 23 years. That meant Holt was present at West Ridge at or near the time the 3 station employees disappeared. The investigation team compiled a summary report, making DNA the case's strongest evidence with 4 key points. 1. DNA under Joe's fingernails proves direct struggle between Joe and Holt. 2. DNA hair on the railing proves Holt's presence at the violence location. 3. 2 independent DNA sources from different locations completely rule out random coincidence. 4 samples collected 2 decades apart lead to the same suspect. Additionally, DNA degradation analysis showed both samples had ages consistent with 1997, eliminating later placement or alternative scenarios. The FBI reached an internal conclusion: there is direct biological linkage between Raymond Holt and the victim. Holt was at the scene and had physical contact with Joe Lasker immediately prior to death. At this point, Holt was no longer a primary subject, but the sole suspect with direct biological evidence tied to the incident. Thanks to the 2 decisive DNA results, the case advanced to a phase with sufficient grounds for the next investigative steps. After 2 independent DNA samples, one from under Joe Lasker's fingernails and one from hair stuck on the West Ridge railing, both matched Raymond Holt, the FBI shifted to a phase of covert surveillance to assess the suspect's current behavior and determine the likelihood of his deeper involvement in the 1997 incident. Holt, then 62 years old, lived in a small log cabin on the outskirts of Elkins, was unmarried, had no significant social relationships, and lived quite isolated. The surveillance team set up 3 observation points along the routes Holt frequently took, while also attaching a GPS tracker to his old pickup truck after obtaining court approval. In the first 2 weeks, Holt mostly traveled only between his home, the auto repair shop where he worked seasonally, and the forest to the south, a longtime habit of his. However, one detail caught the investigator's attention. Whenever he passed no hunting signs, Holt would stop his vehicle for a few minutes, staring intently toward the forest, as if trying to observe something. This behavior was recorded multiple times, especially at a point just 3 miles as the crow flies from West Ridge. During the surveillance, the FBI also explored the possibility that Holt was destroying or concealing evidence. The team checked his trash, monitored his purchases, and even analyzed his history of buying repair supplies. There were no signs that Holt was preparing to leave the state or destroy documents, but he frequently burned wood at night, a behavior not unusual in the area, but the investigators noted it due to its unusual repetition. Once sufficient surveillance data had been gathered, the FBI decided to summon Holt for questioning, based on a lawful order, and the argument that the DNA at the 1997 crime scene required him to explain his presence. The first interrogation took place at the FBI office in Elkins. Holt appeared calm, even somewhat defiant, stating that he had hunted near the Canaan Ridge station area, so the hair getting into the scene was entirely possible. However, when asked about the DNA under Joe Lasker's fingernails, Holt strongly denied it, claiming the sample had been contaminated over time. The first round of questioning ended without a breakthrough, but the investigative team noted one thing: Holt consistently avoided eye contact whenever questions directly related to Ethan Merrick were asked, which differed from his demeanor when Joe was mentioned. In the second round of questioning, the FBI presented new topographic data, including a LiDAR model showing that the slide marks from the railing down to the crevice were not natural slides. Holt viewed the images but maintained his stance of no involvement. However, when the investigator presented a photo of the recovered logbook entry reading, "Joe said someone was at the door." Both went out to check. Holt suddenly shifted his posture, leaned back, and began questioning the investigator about the accuracy of the technical recoveries. The investigative team noted this sign because it was the first time he reacted markedly to non-DNA evidence. In the third round of questioning, the FBI presented the 1997 physical evidence, the metal fragment from the bolt-tightening toolbox. The investigator showed Holt comparison photos of that item with the dent on Ethan's arm bone. Holt tried to remain calm, but began fidgeting with his hands, a sign of stress in behavioral analysis. When the investigator asked, "Do you know that this metal piece is the weapon that best matches the victim's injury pattern?" Holt did not deny it immediately, but replied, "I had no reason to harm anyone at the station." The shift from absolute denial to vague justification was viewed by the linguistic analysis team as a significant change. In the fourth round of questioning, the FBI presented the official DNA results, including a comparison chart between Holt's sample and the one under Joe's fingernails. Holt tried to claim, "Maybe I shook hands with Joe before," but the investigator immediately reminded him that Joe did not know Holt, and the DNA was under the fingernails, the type that occurs during a struggle, not social contact. When cornered in his reasoning, Holt switched to arguing, "Maybe I reached out to support someone who was falling," but the investigative team immediately presented forensic photos proving Joe's injuries were inconsistent with a natural fall. This exposed clear contradictions in Holt's statements. The pivotal moment came in the fifth round of questioning, when the FBI presented a 3D reconstruction of the scene based on the cassette. The investigator explained how the fourth voice was isolated from the noise and played a very short segment of the clarified audio for Holt. As soon as the segment played, Holt reacted by leaning forward, gripping the chair arms tightly, and immediately requesting a lawyer. This ended the session, but the behavioral analysis team viewed it as a strong indicator. Holt recognized his own voice. During the surveillance phase parallel to the questioning, the FBI continued observing Holt after each session. Notably, after the third round, Holt changed his routine. He returned home earlier, kept doors and windows shut, and no longer entered the forest via the old trail as before. One evening, he burned a large amount of wood and trash in his backyard, a behavior the surveillance team noted as potentially related to erasing traces. However, there were no signs Holt was fleeing. In the sixth round of questioning, The final one before determining next actions, the investigator posed a series of linear timeline questions, forcing Holt to describe his actions on December 15, 1997. This was the timeline compression technique used to detect lies through memory inconsistencies. When the investigator asked, "Where were you at 2014 that evening?" Holt paused for about 4 seconds before answering. A 4-second pause, according to FBI behavioral analysis, is a typical sign of fabricating a response. Holt claimed he was at home, but when the investigator presented weather satellite images showing vehicle lights moving near the edge of West Ridge around that time, Holt appeared confused and immediately changed his answer, saying, "Maybe I misremembered." The piling contradictions led the investigative team to conclude that Holt was not only lying but also trying to alter his story based on the information he was facing. In the final summary of the questioning phase, the FBI reached conclusions. 1. Holt had no alibi for the night of December 15, 1997. 2. He reacted strongly when confronted with DNA evidence. 3. His recognition reaction to hearing the fourth voice indicated he knew he had been at the scene. 4. His statements changed repeatedly when faced with physical evidence. And 5. Surveillance behavior showed defensive psychology, typical of a suspect fearing charges. All these signs reinforced the argument that the questioning was no longer just information gathering. It had clearly established Holt's level of involvement in the 1997 incident at Canaan Ridge Station. After completing the surveillance and questioning phases, with numerous contradictions in Raymond Holt's statements, 2 independent DNA samples matching the 1997 evidence, along with topographic models and forensic examinations, confirming signs of violence against Joe Lasker and Ethan Merrick, the FBI and Cold Case Unit agreed that the conditions for seeking an arrest warrant were sufficiently solid. The next morning, the investigative team drafted an affidavit submitted to the federal judge in Charleston, presenting the entire chain of evidence in a structured format: physical evidence, biological evidence, forensic evidence, audio evidence, and deceptive behavior during questioning. The affidavit was over 40 pages long, emphasizing that Holt was not only present at the scene, but had direct violent contact with at least one victim, sufficient to establish grounds for charges. The federal judge reviewed the file that afternoon and signed the arrest warrant on federal charges since the incident occurred at a federal infrastructure facility, the Weather Observation Station. As soon as the warrant was signed, the FBI executed an organized arrest plan. At 6:20 a.m. the following day, a team of 7 agents approached Holt's home in Elkins. After knocking and announcing their identity, Holt opened the door in a confused state, was asked to step onto the porch, and was immediately handcuffed per procedure. He did not resist, but when the agent read the arrest warrant with charges clearly related to the 1997 disappearance, Holt said only one thing: "You don't have proof I killed anyone." This statement was immediately recorded in the report because it showed the suspect's awareness of the investigation's content, which he had not been fully informed about. Holt was transported to the FBI headquarters in Charleston for initial prosecution procedures. There, the U.S. Attorney's Office formally announced 4 charges based on the collected evidence: 1. First-degree murder of Joe Lasker, based on DNA under the victim's fingernails, signs of struggle, and forensic injuries inconsistent with an accident. 2. First-degree murder of Ethan Merrick, based on skull and arm bone injuries matching the metal weapon, along with body displacement covered by landslide. 3. Unauthorized entry into a federal facility, since Holt had no legitimate reason to be at Canaan Ridge Station, and hair evidence on the railing proved his presence at the scene. 4. Interference with federal communications operations, based on cassette analysis showing physical tampering with the radio equipment, leading to signal interruption at 2014 and complete cutoff at 2130, an act deemed to disrupt a federal system. These 4 charges were presented at the initial arraignment, the first time Holt faced court. When the prosecutor presented the DNA evidence, Holt remained silent, only requesting appointed counsel. The court noted the request and arranged a federal public defender for him. In the second arraignment a week later, the federal government formally filed the indictment with the district court, including all supplemental evidence, LiDAR maps comparing 2 periods, 3D injury models, cassette audio analysis, isolating the fourth voice, and forensic reports, concluding clear DNA match ratios. The prosecutor emphasized that Holt was not only present at the scene, but evidence showed he used direct violence against both victims. Additionally, the complete absence of alibi evidence for the night of December 15, 1997, significantly weakened Holt's defense arguments. When asked if he pleaded guilty, Holt replied, "Not guilty." This moved the case to the trial preparation phase. However, in the third arraignment, when the prosecutor detailed the comparison between the railing hair DNA and Holt's, evidence untouched for 23 years, Holt's lawyer countered that the hair could have entered the scene via wind or because Holt had been near the area. The prosecutor immediately rebutted by presenting the railing's position, a structure 1 meter above the trail, under dense forest canopy, where wind could not blow hair up and stick it there. These arguments caused Holt to show signs of impatience. He clenched his jaw and looked at the floor, avoiding all eye contact. The prosecution continued strengthening the charges by adding the fourth count to the record, interference with communications. They presented radio wave analysis showing physical tampering before the signal was fully cut. Upon hearing this, Holt turned to his lawyer and whispered something that was still picked up by the courtroom microphone. "I didn't smash anything." This statement was immediately entered into the record because it proved Holt's awareness that something was smashed in the 1997 incident. The arraignment concluded with the court agreeing to classify the case as a major federal crime due to deadly force, interference with a federal system, and direct biological evidence. Raymond Holt was formally indicted on the 4 charges listed above, and the case entered the federal trial preparation phase. The trial of Raymond Holt opened at the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of West Virginia, drawing particular attention from experts because it was a case where key evidence came not from direct witnesses, but from a chain of physical evidence spanning 23 years, revived through modern forensic technology. The prosecution's evidence presentation began by reconstructing the 1997 context using the logbook, cassette, and forensic reports. The prosecutor told the jury that the logbook, the primary evidence from Canaan Ridge Station, not only recorded daily operations but also contained erased, covered, and smudged entries now recovered via multispectral scanning technology. High-resolution recovered images of the December 15th page were projected on a large screen in the courtroom, clearly showing the line "Joe said someone was at the door. Both went out to check." The prosecutor explained that this line was originally unreadable to the naked eye, but current technology allowed recovery of the pen strokes under the smeared ink. He emphasized that this content was evidence of an outsider's appearance just before the station lost contact and the motive that caused Joe and Ethan to leave the safe area. When Holt was asked if he had any response to this line, his lawyer objected on grounds of speculation, but the judge allowed the prosecution to continue because it was scientific evidence based on physical analysis, not subjective interpretation. Next, the prosecutor presented the cassette recording from the station's internal radio system, a 14-second audio segment, nearly inaudible in 1997, was recovered using multispectral noise filtering and AI voice separation, then played directly for the jury. In the tape, after wind and background noise, there was a loud impact, followed by a muffled sound like a short human cry. Then, the prosecutor played the isolated fourth voice extract, a low, hoarse sound lasting only 0.3 seconds, but sufficient for acoustic analysis. The FBI audio expert presented results. This voice does not match Joe Lasker, does not match Ethan Merrick, and does not match Caleb Hodge. The frequency chart shows 82% similarity with Holt's voice sample, a particularly high figure for such a short segment in noisy conditions. This was the moment Holt first bowed his head during the trial. The prosecution continued with forensic evidence, starting with Joe's body. Reconstructed images of the arm and rib bones showed oblique fractures with sharp edges, characteristic of injuries occurring while bones were still surrounded by soft tissue. The forensic expert explained that this fracture pattern could not occur from falling into the crevice, as a fall would cause multidirectional cracks or small fragments. The prosecutor asked the expert, "In your opinion, when does this fracture pattern occur?" He replied, "It occurs from a strong focused impact from a hard object with a small contact area." The expert then presented comparison images between the dent on Ethan's arm bone and the metal fragment recovered from the 1997 toolbox. Each curve, arc, and depth of the dent was projected as overlapping layers in a 3D simulation. The jury could see the obvious match: the metal fragment fit nearly perfectly with the size and shape of the dent. The prosecutor emphasized that this fragment belonged to a bolt wrench, a tool confirmed missing from the Canaan Ridge station toolbox, and matching the type of tool Holt worked with daily in his auto shop. After the forensic section, the prosecutor introduced the 3D scene simulation, considered the most visual part of the entire trial. Based on 2020 LiDAR data and 1997 scene photos, the model reconstructed the entire West Ridge with near absolute accuracy. On the large courtroom screen, the simulation showed the bent railing position where Holt's hair was found, the broken toolbox location, Joe's displaced body position, Ethan's body under the slide debris, and the slide path simulated with force vectors, showing a trajectory consistent with human body weight rather than rock. The terrain expert's presentation concluded, "No natural terrain form explains the dynamics creating the bent railing, broken toolbox, and aligned slide path with focused push force. These traces best match a scenario of struggle leading to fall and drop." Next, the prosecutor reconstructed the minute-by-minute timeline of the evening of December 15, 1997, based on the logbook radio timestamps and forensic data. He pointed to the timeline chart and presented 19 o'clock. Joe sent the last radio report, no abnormalities. 1910, 1930, logbook noted metal sounds, cassette showed unusual noise, 20 o'clock, automatic report not sent. 2014, partial signal ping, with muffled sound. 2117, clock stop from strong impact. 2130, radio signal cut completely. The prosecutor concluded, "This timeline perfectly matches a model of conflict occurring inside the station before loss of contact." In the charging argument section, the prosecutor emphasized that this was not a case based on speculation, but on 5 independent types of evidence, all pointing to Raymond Holt: biological, mechanical, audio, terrain, and documentary. He called it a perfect chain match with near-zero probability of random coincidence. As the charging continued, the prosecutor displayed the DNA chart on screen were 2 STR sequences. One from Joe's body, one from Holt, aligned. 13 genetic markers matched completely. He said, "This is not just evidence Holt was at the scene. This is evidence Holt had physical contact with the victim while the victim resisted." Then, the prosecution presented the railing hair DNA. This sample was collected in 1997, sealed, undisturbed. Mr. Holt's hair was at the most bent part of the railing, a position only achievable in a direct collision. When Holt was asked to explain why his hair was on the railing, he did not respond. The prosecutor continued, rebutting all possible defense arguments. The hair blown by wind argument was dismissed because the railing was under dense forest canopy, where wind could not blow hair from the ground up to stick there. The DNA contaminated argument was dismissed because the sample under Joe's fingernails contained skin cells in fractured tissue form, only occurring in real struggle. The metal fragment unrelated argument was dismissed by the 3D simulation, showing the dent match on Ethan's bone and the fragment's edge shape. After nearly an hour of presentation, the prosecutor argued to the jury, When a person appears in the logbook, in the cassette, in the DNA, in the bone fractures, in the terrain, that is no longer coincidence. That is intentional presence. The final evidence presented was a video reconstruction of the railing collision, simulated using physics software based on LiDAR data. In the video, force vectors showed a struggle bending the railing outward, with the found hair position exactly at the most bent edge. The prosecutor ended his presentation with Raymond Holt was not just at West Ridge. He caused the injuries that killed 2 men and buried them for 23 years. The entire evidence chain was seamlessly linked, creating a charging file that, according to legal experts present at the trial, was nearly absolutely convincing in federal cold case trials. After many weeks of trial, with all the forensic evidence, recovered logbook, cassette data, 3D simulations, and matching DNA sequences fully presented to the jury, the trial entered the sentencing phase. The jury, after 4 hours of deliberation, returned to the courtroom in tense silence. When asked by the judge for the verdict on the charge of first-degree murder against Joe Lasker, the foreperson stood and said, "Guilty." For the charge of first-degree murder against Ethan Merrick, "Guilty." For the charges of unauthorized entry into a federal facility and obstruction of communications operations, "Guilty." The 3 declarations of guilty rang out in the courtroom, making the atmosphere almost thick with tension. Holt sat motionless, his face expressionless, but his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. With guilty verdicts on all 4 counts, the court moved to the sentencing phase under federal guidelines. The prosecutor requested life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for both first-degree murder counts, along with additional penalties for the remaining 2 charges. Defense counsel attempted to seek leniency by citing Holt's age and the fact that he had no prior convictions for serious violent crimes. However, the judge rejected this argument, stating that the circumstances of the case, 2 victims murdered inside a federal facility, their bodies concealed for 23 years, and clear evidence of intentional use of violence, placed it among the most serious offenses under federal criminal law. The judge cited 18 U.S. Code Section 1111 governing first-degree murder, emphasizing that any premeditated murder occurring in or related to a federal facility falls under federal jurisdiction and carries a maximum penalty of life imprisonment without parole. He also referenced the provision concerning the sabotage or obstruction of a communication system operating for federal safety purposes, which made the case even more serious because it directly threatened the operations of a weather monitoring facility that was part of national security infrastructure. While reading the sentence, the judge made clear that the penalty reflected not only the consequences of the acts, but also the prolonged period of denial of responsibility. He stressed that over the 23 years, Holt had shown no sign whatsoever of remorse or cooperation, and had even attempted to further conceal his actions when he learned the investigation was being reopened in 2020. Finally, the judge pronounced, Defendant Raymond Holt is sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for each count of first-degree murder, to be served concurrently. In addition, the defendant is sentenced to 25 years for the unauthorized entry into a federal facility and 15 years for obstructing a federal communications system, to be served consecutively to the primary sentence. Holt did not react immediately. He simply bowed his head, his shoulders trembling slightly, but said nothing. Defense counsel placed a hand on his shoulder, but Holt did not look up. The courtroom fell silent for several seconds before court officers approached to handcuff him and lead Holt out of the room. Some family members of the victims who were present in court began to cry, but no one spoke loudly. It seemed they had waited for this moment so long that they could no longer react intensely. The sentence was entered into the federal record, marking the legal conclusion of the Canaan Ridge case after more than 2 decades of being considered an unsolved mystery. Once the sentence of life without parole for Raymond Holt was pronounced and the official legal file was closed, the federal investigative agency compiled a comprehensive report on the entire 23-year process since the Canaan Ridge station lost contact in December 1997. The final report, clearly stated that the case could only be solved through the combination of multiple interconnected factors across two distinct phases. The initial search efforts, modern forensic technology, LiDAR data, and the ability to recover evidence. The first part of the report recounted the initial investigation, which had been limited by weather conditions, the technological capabilities of 1997, and the absence of witnesses. Clues such as the torn logbook pages, bent railing, or broken toolbox were initially viewed only as anomalies, insufficient to guide the investigation. When the file was transferred to the cold case unit, many pieces of evidence were sealed and preserved, nearly intact for over 2 decades, becoming the most critical foundation for the reinvestigation in 2020. The final report emphasized that the first turning point was the 2020 landslide that exposed Joe Lasker's body, enabling modern forensic analysis and providing crucial DNA evidence under the victim's fingernails. From there, investigators were able to establish a clear new direction and reopen the case. The second key factor was the remarkable advancement of technology, recovered audio analysis, identifying a fourth voice on the cassette, DNA sequencing from rootless hair samples, 3D impact force simulations, and especially LiDAR technology that reconstructed the terrain from 1997, 2020, to pinpoint the burial location of the second body. The report also noted that the discovery of Ethan Merrick's body and the violent injuries on the bones provided irreplaceable corroboration in proving intentional homicide, completely ruling out the possibility of an accident. The investigative agency concluded that the chain of evidence in the case was a classic example of the value of long-term evidence preservation and the importance of forensic technology in resolving decades-long missing persons cases. However, in the conclusion section, the report officially acknowledged one aspect that remained unresolved. The body of the third victim, Caleb Hodge, had still not been located. Although LiDAR simulations and terrain analysis indicated several areas that might once have covered the body, the final search efforts in late 2020 found no further clear traces. The FBI assessed that Caleb may have been swept farther down the steep slope or buried in sliding rock layers without leaving surface signs. The case was therefore closed for prosecution purposes, but not for the search for remains. The file noted that the search for the third body would continue when conditions allowed or when new technology emerged. The report ended with the observation: the Canaan Ridge case demonstrates that time does not erase the truth. It only delays the day it is found. The persistence of investigators, advances in science, and strict adherence to evidence preservation protocols have enabled the decoding of a mystery that lasted more than 2 decades. With this final summary, the official file was closed, marking the end of one of the longest-running and most complex missing persons cases in modern West Virginia history. In the story of the Canaan Ridge case, what ultimately unraveled the 23-year mystery was not only modern technology, LiDAR, logbook recovery, ultra-sensitive DNA analysis, but also the steadfastness of the justice system in maintaining sealed evidence, storing data, and never overlooking any detail, no matter how seemingly insignificant. It was those skin cells under Joe Lasker's fingernails, the hair strand on the West Ridge railing, or the nearly faded entry in the logbook that became the foundation for bringing the truth back to light. These details serve as an important reminder for American society today, in an era when information can easily become blurred between truth and falsehood, and when constant events make it easy to overlook small details. Careful attention, integrity, and the ability to preserve accurate data have become more vital than ever. The story also underscores that justice does not always arrive on time, but persistence and respect for the truth will ensure it reaches its destination. The investigative agency's dedication to preserving evidence for 23 years so that future technology could unlock it is clear proof that in our personal lives we should never dismiss small signs or fleeting anomalies. Practical lesson: when you notice something wrong, whether in the workplace, someone's unusual behavior, or a risk in the community, document it, report it, preserve evidence. A single small detail can save a life or resolve a major conflict later. Additionally, the story reminds us that safety is never something that happens automatically. It comes from people taking responsibility, watching over one another, and never taking security procedures or environmental warnings lightly. In today's United States, where natural disasters, mountain isolation, and crime risks in remote areas still exist, learning how to prepare, report, and maintain contact in harsh conditions remains essential. Thank you for joining us in exploring this case that spanned more than 2 decades. If you want to continue following in-depth, deeply human true crime stories, please remember to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video, where we'll continue searching for the truth behind mysteries that seem to have faded into oblivion.